Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. The mist rolled in quicker than I'd expected, but I didn't mind. I loved the fog, loved the way it muted everything, softened the edges of the world, made it all feel a little more mysterious. It was perfect for my project. Whispers of the Wild was going to be my best work yet. I could feel it after everything I'd been through in the past year. Hell, in the past month. This was the reset I needed. Just me, my camera, and the Smoky Mountains. No one to answer to, no one to lean on. Just the way I liked it. I hefted my backpack higher on my shoulders and adjusted my camera strap. The trail was rough, more overgrown than I'd expected, but that was part of the draw. The more remote the location, the better the shot. No tourists ruining the landscape with their neon jackets or loud conversations, just untouched wilderness. But untouched wilderness had its downsides. My camera had been acting up since I'd arrived. I'd missed some great shots because of it. Fog rolling over the peaks, a hawk perched on a branch just feet away. But I told myself I didn't care. This trip wasn't about getting everything right. It was about getting away. I paused to catch my breath and set the camera down on a fallen log. The lens fogged up almost instantly in the damp air, and when I wiped it off with the corner of my jacket, I realized I'd smeared dirt across it. Typical. "Come on," I muttered, digging into my bag for a lens cloth. As I crouched there, rubbing at the stubborn streak of mud, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was a woodpecker. There were plenty of them around these parts, but it didn't sound right. Too slow, too steady. Tap, pause, tap, pause. I looked up, but the fog was thickening, swallowing the trees just a few yards ahead of me. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was just a branch knocking against a tree in the wind. I wasn't scared of being out here alone. In fact, I preferred it. No one to distract me, no one to get in my head. Still, the silence that followed felt too quiet, like something was waiting. I shoved the lens cloth back into my pack and stood up, forcing myself to move on. I had a campsite to reach before dark, and I wasn't about to get spooked by a weird noise, at least not this early in the trip. The fog never really lifted by the time I reached the clearing where I planned to camp. It was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. I set up my tent quickly, more out of habit than anything else, though I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I wasn't sure why. There was no one around, no animals scurrying through the underbrush, not even a bird call to break the stillness. I figured a good night's sleep would shake off the nerves. I was just tired. The last few months had been brutal. Breaking up with Paul, the constant fights before it, the way he made me feel like I couldn't do anything right. This trip was supposed to be my way of proving him wrong, proving to myself that I didn't need him, that I didn't need anyone. But the anxiety crept up on me anyway, a tight knot in my chest as I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the ceiling of my tent. Then there was that tapping again, faint and far off. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, just the wind, just the forest. But then it stopped abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch, and I heard something else, something worse, a whisper. It was so faint I could barely make it out, but it was there, threading through the fog outside. It didn't sound like words, not exactly, but it was too rhythmic to be wind, too deliberate. I sat up, listening hard, my heart racing. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it through the thin walls of the tent. Just mist and shadows. The whispering stopped, but the silence that followed felt alive, thick with something I couldn't name. I switched off the light, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I packed up quickly. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I just wanted to get moving. The fog had lifted slightly, but the forest felt wrong somehow, like it was holding its breath. I didn't like it. I wanted to get to higher ground, get some better shots, and move on. By midday, I'd made it to a rocky ridge that overlooked a valley. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of shot I'd come for. The fog clung to the trees below, creating a sea of white with the mountain peaks poking through like islands. I snapped a few photos, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. When I reviewed the pictures on my camera, my breath caught in my throat. There were figures in the fog. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just shadows cast by the trees. But the more I zoomed in, the clearer they became. Tall, thin shapes, barely visible but definitely there, human or something like it, standing motionless among the trees, watching me. I whipped my head around, scanning the valley below. There was no one, just mist and trees. But in the photos, the figures were there. I lowered the camera, heart pounding. I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have. And yet, the air around me felt suddenly cold. Not the kind of cold that comes with a change in the weather. This was different, deeper, like it had seeped into my bones. I should have left right then, packed up, and headed back to the main trail. But I didn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was keeping me here, pulling me deeper into the wilderness. That night, I camped by a small stream. I hadn't seen any more figures, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. I felt like I was being watched constantly. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I built a fire, more for comfort than warmth, and tried to distract myself by reviewing the day's photos. That's when I noticed something else. The figures in the fog weren't in just one picture. They were in all of them. Some barely visible, others clearer, standing in groups or alone, always watching, always there. My hands started shaking, and I nearly dropped the camera. It was impossible. I'd been out there for hours and I hadn't seen anyone. Not a single hiker, no animals, no birds. But there they were, in every shot. Suddenly, the whispering started again. It was louder this time, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The beam of light cut through the mist, but I couldn't see anything. Still, the whispering grew louder, like it was circling me, coming from all directions at once. "You shouldn't be here." That's what it sounded like. A woman's voice, soft but firm, blending with the rustling leaves and flowing water. It wasn't clear, not exactly, but the meaning was clear. I wasn't welcome. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest, and backed toward the tent. The whispering followed me, growing sharper, angrier. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, tall and thin, dressed in old ragged clothes. Her face was pale, hollow-eyed, and filled with sorrow. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. The flashlight flickered back to life, and the whispering stopped. I didn't sleep that night. By the time dawn broke, I knew I had to leave. This wasn't some trick of the mind. No matter how much I'd tried to rationalize it, there was something in these woods, something angry, and I had trespassed. I packed up my gear in record time and set off toward the trailhead. But the forest seemed different now, like the trees were closing in on me. The path I'd taken to get here was gone, swallowed by the fog. My compass spun wildly, useless, and the map was no help in the unmarked wilderness. Panic gnawed at my insides as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to keep my bearings. But the more I walked, the more lost I became. And all the while I could feel her watching, waiting. The whispering started again as I crossed a small clearing, louder this time, angrier. I dropped my pack, desperate, and spun around. There she was, standing in the mist, her eyes locked on mine. I fell to my knees, breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible over the growing wind. "I didn't mean to." Her expression softened just slightly, and for the first time I felt something other than fear. She wasn't just angry, she was in pain. "I'm sorry," I repeated, louder this time. "I shouldn't be here. I didn't know." The wind died down, the whispering faded, and slowly the figure in the mist began to dissolve, melting back into the fog. I sat there for what felt like hours, heart racing, too afraid to move. But she was gone. The air felt lighter, the forest less oppressive. When I finally stood, I saw it, small, barely visible in the fog, a stone hidden among the trees. A grave long forgotten, buried deep in the wilderness. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close. I just stood there for a moment, paying my respects to the spirit I'd disturbed. Then, without looking back, I turned and walked away. I made it out of the Smokies that day, but the images, the figures in the fog, the woman's sorrowful eyes, followed me. I never published the photos from that trip. Some things I realized weren't meant to be captured. Some things were meant to be left alone. Happen around here, I always thought the vastness of the desert would calm me. It's what I needed after everything that had happened at work. The constant pressure, the unrelenting deadlines, the suffocating feeling of being boxed into the same routine. I planned the trip to Big Bend National Park months ago, thinking a week away from it all would clear my head. Solitude in the desert seemed like the perfect way to hit the reset button. I'd heard the stories, of course, rumors of spiritual significance, whispered legends passed down by native tribes, but I'd never put much stock in that kind of thing. They were just stories, right? I was wrong. Big Bend is a place where the land meets the sky in such a dramatic way that it's almost unnerving. The sun bakes the earth by day, and at night the stars stretch endlessly, a canopy of light over the barren landscape. The silence is deafening, and out here, far away from everything, it feels like the world is holding its breath. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to dip behind the distant Chisos Mountains. My plan was simple. Hike the trail to the window, a spot famous for its breathtaking sunset views. I'd set up camp, spend the night there, and continue deeper into the wilderness the next day. A week alone, away from the noise of civilization, I'd been craving this. Everything seemed perfect at first. The air was dry and warm, the trail rugged but manageable, and my gear was top-notch, a mix of high-end camping equipment and essentials I'd collected over the years. I felt prepared, confident, ready to let the desert cleanse my mind. But that feeling didn't last. By the time I reached my campsite, I noticed my GPS was flickering, the signal coming and going without explanation. I chalked it up to a glitch. Maybe the battery was low, though I had checked it before I left. Then my phone started to act strange. The battery, which had been at 80% when I arrived, drained rapidly, dropping to 20% in just a few minutes. No big deal, I thought. I wasn't here to use my phone. After all, this was supposed to be my escape from technology. As I set up my tent, the sun dipped below the horizon and the cold wind swept through the canyon. I hadn't expected the temperature to drop so quickly, and I fumbled through my pack for my jacket. My hands were shaking, and I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or something else. That's when I heard it. The first sign that something wasn't right. It was faint at first, just a whisper carried on the wind, so soft I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, rhythmic, almost like chanting, echoing through the canyon. I paused, holding my breath, straining to hear. There was nothing, just the sound of the wind. "Get it together, Tyler," I muttered to myself. I was overthinking things again. The wind through the rocks, that's all it was. My mind playing tricks on me, feeding into my anxieties like it always did. I finished setting up camp and tried to relax, but uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. The silence was oppressive, heavy, as if the desert itself was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off. I was just tired, exhausted, really. That night, as I lay in my tent, the whispers returned. Louder this time, clearer. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, something real. The whispers grew, surrounding me, coming from every direction. They weren't in English, not even Spanish. It was an ancient language, guttural and rhythmic, like a chant I couldn't understand. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart racing. I reached for my flashlight, but when I clicked it on, the beam sputtered and died. My hands fumbled in the darkness, searching for my backup lantern. When I found it, I clicked it on, flooding the tent with light. But the whispers didn't stop. They only seemed to get closer. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just anxiety. Something was out there. I stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. The fire I'd built earlier had long since died down to embers. I looked around, scanning the landscape with my lantern. That's when I saw it. The small stone cairns, dozens of them, scattered around the edges of my campsite like tiny tombstones. They hadn't been there when I set up camp. I was sure of it. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been here. Or something. My mind raced. Could it have been other hikers? A prank, maybe? But the trail had been empty when I arrived, and this was an isolated spot. No one would have come this far just to mess with me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. My hands were shaking as I backed toward my tent, the beam of my lantern swinging wildly across the ground. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. A shadow, just at the edge of the light, darting between the rocks. It It was too fast to be human. My heart pounded in my chest as I swung the lantern around, trying to catch another glimpse, but there was nothing, just the empty desert. I bolted back into my tent, zipping it shut behind me, as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever was out there. I sat there, gripping the lantern, listening to the whispers fade into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made my heart jump. Every gust of wind felt like something moving just outside. By morning, the whispers were gone, but the unease lingered. I packed up camp, deciding to cut my trip short. I'd head back to the trailhead, call it a failure, and go home. There was no shame in that. But as I started hiking back, something was off. The trail didn't look right. The landmarks, the rock formations, they weren't where they should have been. I pulled out my map, trying to orient myself, but nothing matched. It was like the land itself had shifted overnight. I checked my GPS, but the screen was blank. Dead. My phone, too, had lost all power. Panic set in. I was lost, completely, utterly lost, in the middle of the desert. I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe. I could find my way back. I just retraced my steps. But no matter how far I walked, the landscape seemed to warp around me, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. My footprints, which should have been visible in the sand, were gone, erased, as if I'd never walked that way at all. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on me, but the cold from the night before hadn't left. It clung to me, seeping into my bones. And then I saw it again. The shadow. It was farther away this time, like just a dark figure standing on the ridge, watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was tall, impossibly tall, and thin. I couldn't make out any features, just its silhouette against the sky. It didn't move. It didn't come closer. It just stood there, watching. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to get away from it. I turned and ran, my legs burning as I scrambled over the rocks, my pack bouncing against my back. But no matter how far I ran, the figure was always there. Always just at the edge of my vision, standing still, waiting. My mind raced with the legends I'd read before the trip. Stories of La Malahora, the evil hour, a spirit that lured travelers to their doom. It was said to appear just before tragedy struck, a warning of death. I hadn't believed in those stories, not really. But now, with the shadow stalking me, I wasn't so sure. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert. I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind frayed. I couldn't keep running. I had to face it. I stopped, turning to look at the ridge behind me. The shadow was closer now, standing still, its dark form blending with the rocks. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I'm not afraid," I said aloud, though my voice wavered. "I'm not afraid of you." The shadow didn't move, but I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, weighing down on me. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stand my ground. Slowly, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the landscape like smoke. The whispers, too, faded into the wind, growing quieter until they were gone. I stood there for a long time, the desert silent once more. The sky darkened above me. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here any longer. The next morning, I found the trail. The landscape had returned to normal, the landmarks in the right places, as if nothing had changed. I made my way back to the trailhead, my legs weak, my mind still spinning from the encounter. I left Big Bend that day, never to return. Some people might say it was just my imagination, that the isolation and the anxiety had gotten to me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The desert is a place of mystery, a place where the veil between worlds is thin, and sometimes something crosses over. My name's Joshua Scott, and in 2018, I took my RV to a spot near Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska. I'm not a survivalist or a wilderness guide. I'm an accountant from Atlanta who got fed up with numbers and paperwork. So I figured I'd finally hit pause on life and spend a couple of weeks camping. I drove all the way from Georgia, chasing the quiet, thinking Alaska would be the kind of place where I could just sit back with a beer and let my brain go blank for a while. When I parked the RV in this isolated area just outside the national park, it felt perfect. Not a single person around. I was miles from the nearest campground, let alone a neighbor, and to me, that was ideal. I was setting up my little oasis when I noticed a couple of things off the bat that didn't sit right. The first was the absence of wildlife. I mean, it's Alaska, bears, moose, the whole lot. But around me, nothing. No scat on the ground, no broken branches from animals passing by, just silence, except for the faint rustling of leaves. By day 3, I'd settled into a good routine. Coffee in the morning, a short hike in the woods, then I'd grill up whatever canned meal I felt like eating. It was on one of these afternoon hikes that I stumbled across an old, half-collapsed wooden cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The door was hanging off the hinges, and there was this strange smell around it, a mix of rotting wood and something sharper, kind of metallic. I figured it was rust from some old tool or metal scrap inside, so I brushed it off. But something didn't sit right with me. There were bits of clothing scattered around the area, shirts, old jackets, even a pair of jeans. Looked like they'd been there for years, frayed and faded by the weather. I don't know why, but I felt a chill. Part of me thought I should turn back, but another part, maybe the accountant side that just needs answers, thought I should go inside and take a look around. The interior was even worse. Dirt was caked on every surface. The floor was covered in what looked like animal bones, small ones, maybe birds or rabbits, and that same metallic smell was stronger now. I looked up and noticed something hanging from the ceiling. It was a hook, the kind you'd see in butcher shops. It didn't belong there, not in the middle of a forest, but it was there all the same, swaying slightly as if disturbed by some breeze that I couldn't feel. At that point, I decided to head back to the RV. I figured it was best to keep my distance from whatever strange things were left behind in that place. But when I stepped out of the cabin, I could have sworn I heard footsteps, faint and dragging behind me. I stopped, turned around, and waited, but nothing appeared. The forest around me was dead silent again. Back at the RV, I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I just psyched myself out. That night, though, I barely slept. I had brought a shotgun with me just in case of wildlife, and I kept it by my side. Every little noise outside felt amplified, like something was creeping around just out of sight. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Morning came, and I felt a bit stupid. I decided to spend the day fishing in a small creek I'd passed earlier, trying to distract myself. But even out by the water, that eerie silence remained. No birds chirping, no fish biting, just the occasional snap of a twig somewhere behind me, which I tried my best to ignore. The thought that maybe I wasn't alone out here crept up more than once, and I started questioning if maybe I'd made a mistake coming out this far. Then, later that evening, as I was grilling up some fish, I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye, just on the edge of the tree line. I squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing, but all I could make out was a figure, a man, maybe, crouching low, watching me. He was dressed in what looked like layers upon layers of dirty clothes, all torn up and mud-streaked, his face partially obscured by a tangle of hair. He was still as a statue, just watching. I shouted out to him, trying to play it cool, asking if he was lost, but he didn't respond. Instead, he slowly ducked back into the trees, disappearing without a sound. Every instinct told me I needed to pack up and leave, but stubborn as I was, I convinced myself that he was probably just some harmless drifter. I thought if I ignored him, he'd go away. The next night, things escalated. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a scraping noise coming from outside. It was a slow, dragging sound, like something was being pulled along the side of the RV. I froze, gripping the shotgun tighter than ever, listening. The scraping moved along the length of the vehicle, stopping right outside the window next to my bed. I didn't dare look out. For a solid hour, I just lay there, sweating, listening to the faint scratching on the metal. Then, silence. I finally drifted off, hoping I'd imagined the whole thing. But in the morning, when I stepped outside, there were muddy handprints smeared along the side of the RV. That was enough for me. I started packing up my stuff, thinking I'd head back to the main road and find a new spot, maybe closer to a town. But as I loaded the last of my things, I spotted him again, standing a few yards away by a cluster of birch trees, staring at me with this blank, almost curious expression. He was holding a long, rusty blade, one that looked like it had seen far too much use, and his clothes were even filthier than before. I didn't think. I raised the shotgun and aimed at him, shouting for him to stay back. He just smiled, a slow, unsettling grin, and started to walk toward me, dragging that blade along the ground. I fired a warning shot into the air, hoping he'd take the hint. But he kept coming, unfazed, picking up speed. At that moment, I knew I couldn't just wait around. I ran back into the RV, locked the door, and fired up the engine. But the man lunged at the driver's side window, slamming his fist against it, that rusty blade scraping along the glass. I stomped on the gas, swerving as he clung to the side, banging on the window, his face pressed against it with that same terrifying smile. The RV lurched forward, finally throwing him off balance, and I sped down the dirt road, not daring to look back. After what felt like an eternity, I hit the highway, my heart still pounding. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away, where I could finally breathe. The police in Anchorage were polite but skeptical. They took down my statement and checked out the muddy handprints on the RV, but all they could offer was a half-hearted promise to patrol the area. They didn't even sound like they believed me. Later, out of curiosity, or maybe just out of fear, I did some digging. I found a couple of stories about a man named Gideon, who was known to lurk in those woods. Rumored to be some kind of deranged hermit who'd lived there for decades, people said he'd lost his family in a hunting accident and went off the deep end, becoming obsessed with cleansing the forest of outsiders. I've always found comfort in the silence of the woods, out here away from people, away from the world. You can think straight. George Washington and Jefferson National Forest had been my sanctuary for years, my escape from the clutter of civilization. But this time something felt different. It was as if the land itself was holding a secret it didn't want to share. It had been a rough few months. Lisa left me, and I couldn't say I didn't see it coming. I'd been distant, losing myself in work, then losing the work altogether. I thought a few days alone, hunting and camping, would clear my head. I needed space, and the mountains were the only place I knew where I could truly breathe. The plan was simple. 3 days, 4 tops. Head out to the edge of Silent Pines, an area where the deer roam freely and the mountains are still untouched by the tourist crowd. I'd bag a buck, maybe 2, and return with meat for the freezer. Just me, my gear, and the quiet hum of nature. But it didn't take long for that comfort and hum to go disturbingly quiet. The first day was uneventful, at least at first. I parked my truck at the trailhead, loaded up my pack, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and began the familiar hike into the heart of the forest. My boots crunched over the leaf-covered trail as I climbed higher, the dense trees closing in around me. The fresh mountain air was cool, the perfect kind of crisp that made you feel alive, but something was off. I noticed it halfway through the hike. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, were missing. There was only the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional creak of the trees swaying gently in the wind. I shook it off as nerves. It was always a little eerie out here in the deep woods, especially when you were alone. That was part of the appeal. I told myself it was just the tension I'd been feeling lately, everything weighing on my chest, turning normal things into problems. I set up camp in the clearing near the stream I remembered from previous trips. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountain ridge, casting long shadows over the landscape. The fire crackled warmly as I cooked up some canned stew, sipping from a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, trying to push away the gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't until later that night, after the fire had burned low and I was stretched out in my sleeping bag, that I noticed the first real sign: footsteps. At first, I thought it was just an animal. I mean, what else could it be? Deer? Maybe a raccoon? But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like someone walking, a soft, deliberate crunch in the leaves, moving slowly as if it was circling the camp. I lay still, holding my breath, listening intently. The steps grew closer, then stopped. I sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight and rifle by my side. The firelight flickered dimly, casting long, jittery shadows around the clearing, but there was nothing there. I scanned the tree line, heart pounding harder than I'd like to admit. Nothing moved, just trees standing tall and silent, watching. Must have been the wind, I muttered, my voice shaky. I lay back down, my grip tight on the rifle. I'd always prided myself on being a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy, But something about those footsteps didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the sound itself, it was the feeling that came with it, like I was being watched. The next morning, things got worse. My water jug was gone. I thought I'd been careful about where I left it, but maybe I hadn't sealed it tight. Maybe an animal dragged it off during the night. I searched the area looking for signs of raccoons or coyotes, but all I found were footprints. Human, barefoot, and small, like a child's. But what child would be wandering around the woods miles away from the nearest road in the dead of night? I crouched down, running my fingers over the soft dirt where the prints had pressed into the earth. They seemed fresh, leading in a slow, meandering pattern around the campsite before disappearing into the woods. My skin crawled, a chill running down my spine as I stared at the tracks, my mind racing through every possible explanation. None of them made sense. By midday, I had convinced myself it must have been some local kids playing a prank. Maybe I'd stumbled into someone's turf without realizing it. But as I hiked deeper into the woods, rifle ready, the sense of unease only grew stronger. Every step I took felt heavy, like the trees themselves were watching me, closing in tighter. Then I saw it. I was tracking a deer along the ridgeline when I noticed movement in the trees just ahead. At first, I thought it was the buck I'd been hunting, but then it stepped out into the clearing, a figure, tall, hunched, and gaunt. Its body was draped in shadow, but I could see the faint outline of its pale, too long limbs, twisted in ways a man shouldn't be. And those eyes, two glowing yellow eyes, staring right at me. I froze, rifle raised, heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the wind dead and still around us. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there watching me. "Who the hell are you?" I called out, my voice cracking in the silence. No answer. I swallowed hard, taking a step back. The figure disappeared into the trees as silently as it had appeared. My hands were shaking, the rifle's barrel wobbling as I lowered it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, but I knew better. I'd seen it, and whatever it wasn't human. That night, the footsteps returned, louder this time, circling the camp with purpose. I stayed awake, rifle in hand, listening to the crunch of leaves as it moved closer. Every time I thought I'd hear it right outside my tent, the steps would stop, leaving only the suffocating silence. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even close my eyes without imagining those yellow eyes watching me from the darkness. By the third day, I was a mess, exhausted, jumpy, paranoid. I hadn't seen the figure again, but I could feel it following me, watching. The forest, once my refuge, had become a prison. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how fast I walked, no matter how deep I went, it was always just behind me, waiting. That afternoon, I found more footprints. This time, they were right outside my tent, circling it in strange, looping patterns. There were dozens of them, overlapping, almost chaotic, as if someone or something had danced around the camp all night. My heart raced as I traced the tracks, panic creeping into my bones. The final straw came that evening. I was sitting by the fire, trying to calm my nerves when I heard it again. The soft, whispering voice carried on the wind. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of the trees, but I could make out one thing clearly. It was my name. Nate. I shot to my feet, spinning around, scanning the darkened woods for any sign of movement. The voice called again, softer this time, but closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, stuffed it into my pack as fast as I could, heart pounding in my ears. I needed to leave now. Whatever was out there, whatever had been stalking me for days, wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. As I slung my pack over my shoulder and reached for my rifle, I felt it, a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing at the edge of the firelight, was the figure. Tall, twisted, with limbs too long and eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Its face was pale and gaunt, hollow eyes staring into me as if it could see straight through my skin and into my soul. I raised the rifle, but before I could pull the trigger, it vanished. Just gone, like smoke dissolving into the night air. I ran. I didn't care about the trail, didn't care about my gear. I ran as fast as I could through the forest, branches slapping at my face, rocks and roots tripping me up as I sprinted blindly through the trees. I could hear it behind me, the soft crunch of footsteps following. never far behind. By the time I reached the trailhead, my lungs were burning, my legs felt like jelly, and my mind was racing with fear. I threw myself into the truck, slamming the door shut. The silence inside the cab was deafening. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, finally starting the engine and peeling out of there as fast as I could. Even now, weeks later, I can't get it out of my head. The figure, those eyes, the voice that called my name, luring me deeper into the woods. I haven't told anyone about it. No one would believe me anyway. Just another man who got lost in the forest, right? But I know what I saw. I know what was out there. I haven't been back to the mountains since, and every time I close my eyes, I still see it. Watching. Waiting. My name is Kevin Turner, but most people call me Danny. I was 42 when I drove my RV deep into the heart of Withloochee State Forest looking for solitude. What I found instead was something I can't explain. Something that should never exist. I had been a firefighter for nearly 20 years before I quit, not by choice. My last call had ended in tragedy, a house fire that took my partner's life. I got out. He didn't. Survivor's guilt, they called it. I just called it a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. So I decided to disappear for a while, park my RV somewhere off-grid where no one could find me. Not my ex-wife, not my old station buddies, not the therapist who kept insisting I process my grief. I wasn't interested in healing. I just wanted silence. But silence wasn't what I found. The first night I woke to a scream. Not just any scream. A sound so sharp, so full of pain that it sliced through my skull like a damn ice pick. It sounded like a woman, but not exactly. There was something wrong about it. Too shrill, too stretched, too long. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Outside, my fire had burned low. The woods beyond my RV were pitch black, too still. The sound had stopped, but the ringing in my ears remained. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a panther, maybe a fox. I knew better, but I forced myself to believe it. Then I heard footsteps, slow, circling the RV. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, aiming it out the window. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw something strange. A few feet from my fire pit, the dirt was disturbed, like something had been standing there for hours, watching. I shook it off, blaming my own paranoia, and spent the day hiking. The deeper I went into the forest, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, just that thick, dead air pressing against my ears. Then I nearly tripped over it. A burned-out structure. Small, almost like a shack. It wasn't on any maps I'd checked before coming here. It looked old, but not ancient, maybe a couple of decades, judging by the way the wood had blackened and split. I stepped closer, kicking at the ashes. That's when I saw the names, carved into the charred floorboards, scratched deep into the wood like someone had done it with their bare nails. Some were worn away by time, but others, I froze. One of them was mine, Kevin Turner. I stepped back fast, my pulse hammering. I'd never been here before, no one knew I was here, and yet, there it was, my name burned into the bones of this ruined place. Something rustled behind me. I turned too fast, nearly falling. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the trees. Nothing, but then, through the dense undergrowth, I saw it. A figure, watching me. It was only there for a second, just a flicker of movement before it melted into the shadows. But my gut twisted at the shape of it, the way it stood, the way it leaned, just a little too far forward, like it was waiting for me to speak first. I didn't. I ran. I got back to my RV at dusk, out of breath, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave. But when I reached for my keys, they weren't there. I tore the place apart, searching the countertops, the drawers, my backpack. Nothing, like they had just disappeared. Then the radio crackled. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even turned it on. But now it was hissing with static, cutting in and out like a half-tuned station. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The noise sharpened. Mercer. I stopped breathing. Help me. A woman's voice. Ragged, full of pain, distant, like she was speaking through a tunnel that stretched beyond time. Then the screaming started. It blasted through the radio at a deafening pitch, so loud and shrill that I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. It was inside me, rattling my skull, vibrating through my teeth like my bones were coming apart. My nose started bleeding. I reached up and ripped the radio out of the dashboard. Silence. My whole body shook as I stared at the radio in my hands. My ears were still ringing. My skin felt raw. I was leaving. Right now. I grabbed my emergency bag and a flashlight and bolted outside. I didn't care about the RV anymore. I'd hike out to the road, flag down a car, whatever it took. But the second my boots hit the dirt, I froze. Because standing at the tree line, illuminated by the last sliver of dying daylight, was her. Blackened skin sloughing from her face. Eyes, hollow pits of darkness. She screamed. My flashlight exploded in my hand. The sound sent me crashing to the ground, gasping for air. My lungs felt like they were on fire. My vision went white. When I could finally see again, she was gone. I don't know how long I lay there. When I finally pulled myself up, my whole body was trembling. I turned toward the road, forcing my legs to move. But no matter how far I walked, I always ended up back at the burned clearing, like the forest had twisted itself around me, like I'd never left. A part of me knew then, knew that I wasn't getting out of here. The woods whispered my name, and then I saw myself, standing at the edge of the clearing near the wreckage of the burned shack, my own face, my own eyes. But wrong, the copy of me smiled. Not a normal smile, too wide, too sharp, like the skin was splitting just to stretch the mouth that far. I took a step back. The other Danny didn't move. Instead, he lifted his hand and pointed. I turned, and the burned woman was standing right behind me, her mouth opened. I never heard the final scream. I just remember the fire, the heat swallowing me whole, the crackling of my own flesh peeling away, the sound of my own voice joining hers, burning in agony. And then, nothing. Days later, a ranger found my RV, burned down to the frame, no body inside, just my name carved into the trees, and the radio still playing, a soft, distant scream. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, enjoying the silence for hours, but now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite, deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life, birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique one I'd brought along to mess around with during my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing. Until now. I stood up from the fire, walking over to the RV and ducking inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it, a voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers, 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere, maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing, I was sure, but the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong, like the message wasn't for just anyone, like it was for me. I shut the radio off, my fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods, the towering pines looming overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, made me uneasy. I stepped back outside, trying to push the growing sense of unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. I heard it too. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal. The numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals, glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes, that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1, 3, 7. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes were constantly scanning the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning, or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "A warning from what?" Before I could ask more, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence, the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. Then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I could barely whisper back, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "We see you," the voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. "We see you." I stood up, flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy like the atmosphere itself was alive. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once, I agreed. The next morning, I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no note. Just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles, the battery draining faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 1, 3, 7. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, an old dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. my heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal, a small glowing device, pulsing with an eerie cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices, all crashed into me at once in an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, as if something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV. The lights followed me, the clicking never far behind. But I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper. Even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror, it didn't stop. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them. 1, 3, 7. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. I parked my RV deep in the Black Hills, farther than I'd ever dared to go before. The last sign of civilization had been a gas station over an hour back, and now it was just me, the trees, and the silence. And that was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. After the divorce, I craved it like a drug. I needed this trip to remind myself of who I used to be before the arguments, before the failures, before the loneliness settled in like a slow-burning rod. Out here, surrounded by miles of forest, I'd find peace. At least that's what I told myself as I killed the engine, the sudden quiet swallowing me whole. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, breathing in the sharp, cold air. The Black Hills were breathtaking, tall, ancient pines rising like sentinels against the darkening sky. The wind was still, not even a rustle of leaves, just silence. I walked around the clearing, feeling the weight of the world lift ever so slightly with each step. This was why I loved the wilderness, the isolation, the escape. But there was something off this time, a heaviness in the air. I'd been here before, years ago, but it had never felt like this. I shook off the feeling. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had been a rough few months, and I wasn't thinking straight. A couple of nights out here would fix that. I busied myself with setting up camp, though I didn't have much to do. The RV had everything I needed. I lit a fire outside anyway for old time's sake and poured myself a drink. I sat on the fold-out chair and stared into the flames, letting the warmth pull me in. Then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, like tapping. I looked around, but there was nothing, probably just the forest settling. I turned back to the fire, trying to relax, but the noise came again, rhythmic, deliberate this time. I couldn't shake it off. Animals, I muttered to myself, standing up and shining my flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense undergrowth. I scanned the edge of the forest, expecting to see a raccoon or a deer, but there was nothing, just the trees, standing tall, unmoving. I took a deep breath and laughed. I was being paranoid. The first night alone always did this to me, made me jump at shadows. I headed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. That night, I slept fitfully. Dreams of my ex-wife drifted through my mind, her face twisted in anger, her voice echoing in that same sharp, accusing tone I knew too well. I woke up several times, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. By morning, the feeling of unease still clung to me like a damp fog. I tried to ignore it, pushing myself to enjoy the day. I spent the morning hiking, trying to lose myself in the familiar sights of the Black Hills, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt off, too quiet, too still. I returned to the RV just after midday, planning to settle in and enjoy a lazy afternoon. That's when the real problems began. The generator sputtered and died as I tried to start it up. I cursed, fiddling with the switch, but nothing happened. No power, no lights, and no heat. I wasn't worried yet. I couldn't figure it out. I always did, but the frustration simmered beneath the surface. I was already on edge, and the last thing I needed was for the RV to start malfunctioning. I grabbed my toolkit and went outside, working on the generator for what felt like hours. As I crouched next to the RV, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, wrench in hand, listening. There it was again. Soft, slow steps, like someone was circling me. I whipped around, but the forest was empty. Just the same dense pines, standing silent, watching. "Get it together, Jack," I muttered, turning back to the generator. By dusk, I was back inside. The generator was still dead, and the RV was cold, but I told myself it was fine. I'd built a fire outside, so I didn't need heat in here. I sat by the fire again, staring out into the forest, hoping the flames would chase away the anxiety that had been building all day. That's when I saw them. Shadows, just at the edge of the firelight. They were tall, thin, humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too elongated, too stiff. They stood between the trees, unmoving, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I blinked, thinking I was imagining things, but they didn't disappear. They were still there, standing in the shadows just beyond the fire. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. The figures remained still, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I stood up slowly, grabbing the flashlight and shining it toward them. But the beam seemed to bounce off the darkness, unable to penetrate the trees. When I lowered the light, they were gone. I stumbled back into the RV, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I paced the small space, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone followed me out here? Were they messing with me? I grabbed my phone, only to find the battery drained. Dead. The same with my watch. I was completely cut off. I tried to calm myself down, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I felt like I was being watched, even inside the RV. I peeked out the window, expecting to see those figures again, but the clearing was empty. The fire outside was still burning, casting flickering shadows across the ground. I crawled into bed, wrapping myself in blankets to ward off the chill that had settled in. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was jumping at shadows because of the divorce, because of the loneliness. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I barely slept that night, and when I did, my dreams were filled with strange voices, whispers that sounded like my ex-wife, but hollow, distorted. She called to me from the darkness, telling me to come outside to follow her into the trees. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It was morning, but the RV was still freezing. I could see my breath fogging in the air. I had to leave. Something was wrong here, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what. I threw my things together, ready to get the hell out of the Black Hills, but when I tried the engine, the RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, it sputtered and died. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, panic rising in my chest. I grabbed my bag and rushed outside, but as soon as I stepped into the clearing, I froze. They were back. The figures, tall, hollow-eyed shadows, stood at the tree line surrounding the clearing. Dozens of them now, all watching me, waiting. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The fire had burned out during the night, and the clearing was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog. I had to get out of here. The figures didn't move as I grabbed my camping knife and marched toward the nearest tree, determined to hack my way out of this nightmare. I had seen strange carvings on some of the trees, symbols jagged and twisted. Maybe they had something to do with this, something to do with the figures. With trembling hands, I drove the blade into the bark, carving through the strange lines. As soon as I broke the symbol, the air shifted. The shadows flickered, and for a moment I thought I heard a low echo and wail. I didn't stop. I hacked at the trees, cutting through every symbol I could find. The voices in my head grew louder with each slash. My ex-wife's voice, distorted and hollow, begged me to stop, telling me to come into the forest, to let go. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. Finally, when I had cut through the last symbol, the air went still. The figures at the tree line melted away, dissolving into the fog. I stumbled back to the RV, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The engine roared to life on the first try. I sped out of the clearing, not daring to look back. The Black Hills vanished behind me, swallowed by the fog. But even now as I write this, I can still feel them watching, waiting. The hollow ones never really let you go. My name is Brian Underwood, and back in 2018, I decided to take a much-needed break in the vast expanse of the Yukon Territory's Kluane National Park. As a freelance photographer, I'd spent years chasing deadlines and cityscapes, and I craved the isolation only the wild could offer. So I packed up my RV and set off, eager for a solitary adventure, amid glaciers and mountain peaks. The park was everything I hoped for. Towering mountains capped with snow, turquoise lakes reflecting the sky, and an endless horizon that made me feel both insignificant and profoundly alive. I set up camp near a secluded spot by the Duke River, far from the designated camping areas. It was early June, and the days were long, stretching sunlight well into the evening. On my second day, while hiking along a lesser-known trail, I met a fellow traveler named Mark Hastings. He was in his late 40s, with a rugged beard and a friendly demeanor. We bonded over our shared love for the outdoors and decided to fish together that afternoon. As we cast our lines into the clear river, he shared stories of his travels through Canada's wilderness, each tale more adventurous than the last. "Ever been up to the glaciers?" Mark asked, reeling in a catch. "Not yet," I replied. "Planning to head that way tomorrow. They say the view is unmatched." He nodded. "Be careful up there. Terrain can be tricky and weather changes fast." As evening approached, we parted ways. He was heading back to his campsite a few miles upstream, and we made vague plans to meet again. I returned to my RV, cooked a simple meal, and settled in with a book. The silence of the wilderness was a balm to my urban-weary soul. The next morning, I decided to explore the area near the glaciers as planned. The hike was strenuous but rewarding. The air was crisp, and the landscape shifted from dense forest to rocky inclines dotted with wildflowers. By midday, I reached a vantage point that offered a breathtaking view of the ice fields. While setting up my camera for a panoramic shot, I noticed something unusual through the lens. A flicker of movement far off across the glacier. Zooming in, I saw what looked like a group of people trekking, which was odd given the remoteness of this area. They moved in a staggered line, hauling large backpacks. Curiosity piqued, I decided to get a closer look. As I descended toward the glacier, I stumbled upon a narrow path that seemed to lead in their direction. The trail was marked with fresh footprints and grooves, as if heavy equipment had been dragged through recently. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I brushed it off as overactive imagination. About an hour later, I came across a small makeshift camp tucked into a hollow between ice formations. There were tents camouflaged with white tarps, crates stacked haphazardly, and the faint smell of diesel fuel in the air. Hiding behind a ridge, I observed the scene. Men were unloading containers and carrying them into a crevasse that seemed to open into the glacier itself. Suddenly, a hand clapped on my shoulder. I spun around to face Mark, his expression stern. "What are you doing here?" He whispered harshly. "I could ask you the same," I retorted, confusion mixing with alarm. "You shouldn't be here, Brian. This isn't a place for tourists," he said, his eyes darting nervously back toward the camp. Before I could respond, voices echoed from the camp. A group of men was heading our way, speaking in hushed tones. Mark grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a boulder. "Listen to me carefully," he said urgently. "These people are dangerous. You need to leave now." "Who are they? What's going on?" I demanded. He hesitated before answering. "They're smugglers, trafficking illegal goods across the border using the glacier tunnels." My heart raced. "Are you involved in this?" "No," he insisted. "I'm with the RCMP undercover. I've been tracking them for months." The voices grew louder. Shadows stretched as the men approached. Mark pressed a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay silent. Just then, a sharp crack echoed through the air. A gunshot. We both ducked instinctively. Chaos erupted as the smugglers scattered, shouting orders in a mix of languages. Mark pulled a handgun from under his jacket. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Before we could move, two men rounded the boulder, rifles raised. Mark fired swiftly, hitting one in the shoulder. The other lunged at him, and they grappled fiercely. I watched in stunned disbelief as they fought, the smuggler's knife glinting dangerously. Seizing a rock from the ground, I struck the attacker on the back of the head. He crumpled, and Mark pushed him aside. "Thanks," he muttered. "We have to destroy their stash and call for backup." We made our way toward the camp cautiously. The area was deserted. The smugglers had either fled or were regrouping. Inside one of the tents, we found crates filled with weapons and packets of white powder, drugs meant for distribution. "Help me with this," Mark said, dousing the crates with gasoline from a nearby canister. We set the camp ablaze, flames licking up toward the sky. The smoke would be a signal, but also a beacon for any remaining smugglers. As we retreated, Gunfire erupted again. A bullet whizzed past my ear, and we took cover behind an ice wall. "They're not letting us leave easily," I shouted over the noise. Mark radioed for assistance, but the mountainous terrain interfered with the signal. "We need to get to higher ground." We sprinted toward a ridge, bullets striking the ice around us. Reaching a plateau, Mark tried the radio again. This time, he made contact. "Officer down. Need immediate extraction at Glacier Point," he reported. A helicopter's distant rotor became audible, but the smugglers were closing in. One of them caught up, tackling me to the ground. We struggled, his hands tightening around my throat. Spots danced before my eyes as I gasped for air. Mark intervened, pulling him off me and subduing him with a well-placed blow. "Come on, we're almost there." We reached an open area just as the helicopter appeared over the horizon. Relief was short-lived. A group of smugglers stood between us and rescue. Outnumbered and low on options, we prepared to make a stand. "Any jokes up your sleeve?" I quipped nervously. "Not the best time for stand-up comedy," Mark replied grimly. The smugglers advanced, weapons drawn. Suddenly, the helicopter swooped in low, and armed officers rappelled down, engaging the criminals in a swift firefight. Within minutes, the smugglers were apprehended or incapacitated. An officer approached us. "You guys okay?" "Better now," Mark responded. As the scene was secured, I sat on a rock, trying to process the whirlwind of events. Bodies were being loaded onto stretchers, some unconscious, others lifeless. The reality of how close I'd come to death settled heavily. "Looks like you got more adventure than you bargained for," Mark said, sitting beside me. "No kidding," I replied. "Next time I want excitement, I'll stick to roller coasters." He chuckled. "Probably safer." Back at the base camp, I was debriefed by authorities. They took my statement and advised me to keep the details confidential due to the ongoing investigation. As evening fell, I finally returned to my RV, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. The following day, I decided to leave the park. The allure of solitude had been overshadowed by the stark dangers I had never imagined. Before departing, I did some research at a local library, curious about the operation I had stumbled upon. I discovered that the smuggling ring had ties to a larger criminal network operating along the Canada-US border. They used remote wilderness areas to move contraband, exploiting the challenging terrain to evade law enforcement. Mark Hastings, whose real name was Agent Marcus Hale, had been instrumental in dismantling several such groups. As I drove away from Kluane National Park, the majestic mountains in my rearview mirror, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. The open road ahead seemed both inviting and safe, a welcome contrast to the perilous glaciers. In the end, the adventure I had sought had found me in the most unexpected way. I returned to photography with a renewed appreciation for the mundane. As for Agent Hale, he continued his covert work, blending into landscapes where danger lurked beneath the surface. I thought I knew isolation. I'd spent years driving across the country chasing celestial events, camping in places no one else dared to go. Black Rock Desert was supposed to be no different. I'd chosen this spot because it was one of the darkest places in the United States, far from the light pollution of cities, with nothing but the stars above and the cracked earth below. A perfect place to watch the meteor shower I'd been anticipating for months. But the desert has a way of getting under your skin. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun blazing high, its rays bouncing off the endless white of the salt flats. The ground stretched out in every direction, flat and featureless, interrupted only by distant mountains rising like ghosts on the horizon. It was beautiful in a desolate way, the kind of place that makes you feel small and insignificant. Exactly what I needed. The RV's engine rumbled to a stop, kicking up dust as I parked. I opened the door, stepping into the dry, hot air. The silence was immediate. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of civilization, just a profound, almost oppressive stillness. I told myself it was peaceful, that this was what I wanted. A few days alone in the desert to focus on my photography and watch the night sky. But as I looked out over the vast expanse of cracked earth, a strange feeling settled in my chest, like a weight pressing down. I brushed it off. It had been a long drive, and the heat was getting to me. I'd feel better once the sun went down. I spent the first few hours setting up camp, adjusting my telescope and testing my camera equipment. The sky was still a blazing blue, but the desert's unforgiving heat was beginning to fade, replaced by a sharp chill as the sun sank lower. By the time dusk arrived, the temperature had plummeted, and I retreated into the RV to grab a jacket before stepping back outside. That's when the radio first crackled to life. I'd brought my old ham radio along, hoping to catch some weather updates or maybe listen in on local astronomy broadcasts. I hadn't expected much out here, but the static-filled hum surprised me. I turned the dial, searching for a signal, and for a moment I thought I'd found one. A faint voice cutting through the static. "Don't stay." I froze. The words were barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind, but they were unmistakable. I leaned closer, adjusting the frequency, but the voice was gone, replaced by the familiar hiss of static. I turned the radio off, chalking it up to interference, old equipment, or weird atmosphere. Still, the unease in my chest was growing. The first night was incredible. The sky came alive with meteors streaking across the blackness, more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. I stood in awe, snapping pictures, adjusting my telescope, completely losing track of time. Out here under the stars, the rest of the world felt far away. It was just me, the night, and the vastness of space. And yet, something nagged at me. When I reviewed the photos later, I noticed something strange in the background of one of my long exposure shots. There was a blur, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge. At first, I thought it was a mistake, dust on the lens maybe, or a glitch in the camera's settings. But as I scrolled through the rest of the images, the blur appeared again and again in each photo. It seemed to be getting closer to the RV. I wiped the camera lens, took another shot, and stared hard at the screen. Nothing. It had to be some kind of artifact from the desert air, the heat mixing with the cold night, playing tricks on the lens. Still, the feeling in my chest tightened. I turned in early, trying to push the unease aside, telling myself I'd check the equipment in the morning. Day 2 was different. I woke to a stifling heat that even the RV's air conditioning couldn't seem to fight. I cursed, fiddling with the controls, but the air blowing through the vents was weak and warm. I grabbed a bottle of water and stepped outside, hoping the breeze would provide some relief, but the air was dead still as the grave. I spent most of the day trying to fix the RV's engine, which had been acting sluggish since I arrived. I knew I should be enjoying the desert, but the more time I spent out there, the more the silence started to gnaw at me. It wasn't the peaceful isolation I had expected. It felt watchful. As the day dragged on, the sun beat down, turning the ground beneath my feet into a furnace. The radio, which had been quiet since last night's strange transmission, crackled to life again. This time, the voice was clearer. "Danger. You need to leave." I dropped the wrench I was holding, staring at the radio in disbelief. The voice was faint, distorted, like it was coming from miles away. But it was unmistakable. Someone or something was speaking to me. I snatched up the radio, twisting the dial, trying to find the source. Static. Nothing but static. The voice was gone again, leaving me standing in the middle of the desert, sweat running down my back, my heart hammering in my chest. I should have left then. I should have packed up and driven out of there. But the RV's engine was still stalling, and part of me didn't want to admit that I was spooked. This was why I came out here, wasn't it? To face my fears, to be alone in the dark. I stayed. And that night, the shadows came. The meteor shower was more intense on the second night, the sky alive with fire and light. I sat by the RV, staring up at the heavens, the vastness of the universe overwhelming. But no matter how beautiful the stars were, my eyes kept drifting back to the edges of the desert, where the darkness seemed to pool, thick and impenetrable. It was there, at the far edge of my vision, that I first saw the figure, a shape standing just beyond the reach of my campfire's light. At first, I thought it was a trick of the eye. The desert plays with your perception. Distances blur, shadows stretch. But when I blinked, the figure was still there, standing, watching. I grabbed my camera, adjusting the focus, snapping a shot before the figure disappeared. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe an animal, or even another camper who'd wandered too close. But when I checked the camera's screen, my blood went cold. The figure wasn't human. It was tall, too tall, with elongated limbs and a strange, distorted form. It was like a shadow brought to life, a smear of darkness against the starlit sky. The more I stared at it, the more unreal it looked. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I slowly lowered the camera. When I looked again, the figure was gone. The air was suddenly freezing, the kind of cold that bites at your skin. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me, my heart racing. I told myself I was imagining things. The desert played tricks on people. I'd read about it. People seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices carried on the wind. But that didn't explain the figure in the photo. The night dragged on, and I stayed awake, listening for anything, any sound, any movement. But all I heard was the persistent hum of the radio and the static growing louder by the minute. The next day, I knew I had to leave. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just my imagination. The figure, the voices, I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I packed up as quickly as I could, but when I turned the key in the ignition, the RV sputtered and died. I tried again and again. Nothing. I stepped out into the desert, sweat pouring down my face. The heat was oppressive, and the silence pressed in on me, suffocating. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal, and the radio was useless. Just a constant, garbled stream of static. Then the voice returned, louder than ever. "Stay. Come closer." It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a command. And when I looked out across the desert, I saw the figure again. Closer this time, standing in the distance. Its form was hazy and indistinct, but unmistakable. It was waiting for me. My legs felt like lead as I backed toward the RV, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air was freezing now, the warmth of the day gone, replaced by a bone-deep chill. I knew in that moment that if I stayed, I would become like the figure, a shadow, a ghost, trapped in this forsaken place, wandering the desert forever. I ran. I don't know how I got the RV started. Maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe sheer panic. But when the engine finally roared to life, I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't look back. The figure, the voice, the cold, they all faded into the distance as I sped across the salt flats, the desert stretching endlessly behind me. I never looked at the photos again. I couldn't. Whatever was out there, it was better left unseen. I'll never return to Black Rock Desert. Some places were meant to be empty. We thought we knew the Ozarks. Matt swore up and down that Mark Twain National Forest was a hidden gem. Untouched trails, beautiful vistas, perfect for a 3-day backpacking trip. He was always good at selling these kinds of trips, making it seem like a dream adventure. I believed him mostly because I loved him. But even then, as we parked the car at the trailhead and unloaded our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to be different. "Looks like we're in for some real wilderness this time," Kyle said, flashing a grin. He was already making jokes about getting lost and being eaten by cryptids. Classic Kyle, always trying to lighten the mood. I laughed it off, but something about the dense trees and the isolation made the joke sit heavy in my chest. The forest felt too quiet, too vast. Matt, as usual, was all business. He was adjusting his pack, double-checking the map on his phone. "We'll follow the GPS for most of the way," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "Should be easy, just a couple of tough climbs, but nothing we can't handle." I glanced at Sarah, who was tightening the straps on her hiking boots. She was always the tough one, competitive, never backing down from a challenge. I liked that about her, but sometimes it felt like she had something to prove, especially when Matt was around. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or rivalry. "Let's get moving," Matt called, waving us on. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." The first day went as expected. We hiked deeper into the forest, leaving behind the marked trails and venturing into the heart of the wilderness. The trees were taller here, their branches heavy with green, creating a canopy that let in only slivers of sunlight. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole, but Matt pressed on, oblivious to the creeping unease that gnawed at me. That night, we set up camp by a small stream. The air was cooler than I expected, a bite of cold that sank into my bones as the sun set. Kyle's tent had a broken pole, something he hadn't noticed until we tried setting it up. He laughed it off, saying he'd just sleep in Sarah's tent, but Matt's frustration was clear. "Next time, check your gear before we leave," Matt snapped, his voice tight. "Relax, man. It's just a tent pole," Kyle said, but the tension between them simmered. I was too tired to deal with their bickering, so I busied myself with starting the fire. Dana, my girlfriend, snapped photos as always, capturing the last glimmers of daylight filtered through the trees. She looked peaceful behind the camera, but I could tell she felt it too, that sense that something was off. That night, we heard the first howl. It was distant at first, almost like the wind moving through the trees, but then it came again, low and deep, rising into a chilling wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "What the hell was that?" Sarah muttered, her hand instinctively moving toward the hatchet strapped to her pack. Matt shrugged, trying to play it off. "Probably just a coyote or something. These woods are full of wildlife." But it didn't sound like any coyote I'd ever heard. I exchanged a glance with Dana, and she raised her eyebrows in that way she did when she didn't believe something. Kyle, of course, took the opportunity to joke. "Sounds like Bigfoot's out there, or maybe the Ozark Howler," he said, his voice teasing. "You guys know that one, right? Big hairy creature, glowing red eyes, hunts hikers for fun." "Knock it off," Matt said sharply. "It's just an animal. Get some sleep. We've got a long hike tomorrow." I tried to brush it off too, but lying in our tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig outside made my heart race. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was restless sleep. The next morning, Dana told me she'd seen something outside the tent just for a second, but she was sure of it. Red eyes. "I saw red eyes, Matt," she said softly. I laughed nervously, thinking she must have been half asleep. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," I said, though even I didn't believe it. I hadn't told anyone about the dreams I'd had, the sensation of being watched, hunted, like we were intruding on something that didn't want us there. Day 2 was worse. The forest grew denser, the path less defined, and the GPS signal flickered in and out. At one point, we lost it completely. Matt insisted he could still navigate using the map, but the landscape wasn't matching up with anything. The trees felt wrong, closer somehow, like they were moving in on us. The air grew colder and the silence pressed down like a weight. "We're lost," Sarah said flatly, glaring at Matt. "We're not lost," he snapped back. "I know where we are." But he didn't. None of us did. That night, we found claw marks on the trees, deep gouges, like something had raked through the bark with claws far larger than any animal should have. Dana's hands trembled as she took pictures, but Matt dismissed it. "Could be a bear," he said, though the unease in his voice was obvious. "That's not a bear," Kyle muttered, his earlier joking tone gone. He stared at the claw marks, his face pale. "This is messed up, man. Maybe we should turn back." "We're not turning back," Matt said, his voice rising. "We've come this far. We stick to the plan." The argument that followed was inevitable. Sarah sided with Kyle, saying we were unprepared and it wasn't worth the risk. Dana stayed quiet, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Matt, stubborn as ever, refused to admit we were in over our heads. We set up camp again that night and the howling returned. This time it was closer, louder, the sound reverberating through the trees like something was circling us. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of those red eyes watching us from the darkness. In the morning, we found more signs. Animal carcasses torn apart, strewn across the ground. Deer, mostly, their bodies mangled in ways that didn't make sense. No predator would kill like that, not for food. It was like something had ripped them apart for fun. Kyle was the first to voice what we were all thinking. "It's the howler, man. I'm telling you, this place is messed up." Matt, as always, refused to believe it. "It's just a predator. Wolves. Maybe." "There are no wolves in the Ozarks," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Not anymore." We kept moving, but the howls followed us, louder, closer. By late afternoon, we knew we weren't alone. We were being hunted. It was just before dusk when we saw it. We stopped to rest, setting our packs down near a small clearing. That's when Dana froze, her camera slipping from her hands. "Matt," she whispered, "behind you." I turned just in time to see it step out of the trees, hulking, shadowy, with glowing red eyes that burned through the dim light. Its body was massive, covered in thick, dark fur, but its shape was wrong, twisted, like something caught between animal and something more. The howl that followed was like nothing I'd ever heard, a deep, guttural sound that shook me to my core. It didn't charge. It didn't attack. It just stood there, watching as if daring us to move. We didn't. "What the hell is that?" Kyle's voice was barely a whisper, his face drained of color. "It's not real," Matt muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Dana grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "We have to go," she said, her voice trembling now. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, its red eyes glowing brighter. Then, with one last bone-chilling howl, it slipped back into the trees. We didn't wait to see if it would return. We packed up in record time and started moving fast. Too fast. The light was fading, and we were stumbling over roots and rocks, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. That night, we didn't set up camp. We just kept walking, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. The howls continued, closer, always closer. When dawn finally broke, we stumbled upon an old ranger's cabin. Its roof caved in, the windows shattered. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We collapsed inside, too exhausted to keep going. For the first time in hours, the howling stopped. Matt stared at the floor, his face pale, his hands shaking. "It's not real," he whispered over and over again like a broken record. But we knew better. We had heard it, seen it. The Ozark howler was real, and it had let us live for now. As we sat in that ruined cabin, the forest watching, waiting, I realized we hadn't escaped. Not really. The howler was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. I should have known something was wrong the second I stepped out of the RV. The forest around me felt too still. The kind of stillness that makes you question whether the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But I brushed it off. I was in the middle of the Sawtooth National Forest, miles from any other campers or hikers. This was exactly what I wanted. Complete isolation. This place was going to make for the perfect series on my channel. Unmarked trails. I'd call it a deep dive into forgotten paths, places people were too afraid to explore. And this one, it had all the elements of a viral video. No one knew much about the unmarked trail I was hunting, only vague rumors of hikers disappearing and whispered stories of something called the Collector. Something about that name intrigued me. I wasn't one to believe in folklore or ghost stories, but my audience loved them, and that's what mattered. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. I hiked, filmed B-roll footage, and narrated into my camera about the history of the area. The trail I was following wasn't exactly easy to find. I had to rely on a few tips from locals, a vague map sketched by a guide at a general store, and a lot of guesswork, but I found it. An overgrown path cutting into the forest, almost hidden by the surrounding brush. Perfect. "This is it," I said into the camera, feeling the excitement bubble up. The forgotten trail. I spent that afternoon hiking along it, deeper into the wilderness than I'd planned. Time got away from me, but the sun was still up, casting golden light through the canopy. I knew I had to head back to camp soon, but the trail kept pulling me further. I wanted more footage, more content for the channel. By the time I returned to my RV, dusk was settling in. I set my gear down, sat by the fire I'd built earlier, and reviewed the footage. That's when I noticed it. In the background of one of my shots, there was something. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees. It was faint, barely visible, but definitely there. A tall, shadowy outline, watching me. I rewound the clip and zoomed in, but when I played it back again, the figure was gone. Just trees. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had been alone all day, hadn't I? "It's nothing," I muttered to myself, shaking off the creeping unease. Probably a glitch in the camera, some kind of light distortion. I'd seen that before. But even as I tried to rationalize it, my eyes kept drifting back to the tree line, scanning for movement. Nothing. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me sit up in bed, ears straining, heart pounding, but the forest was quiet, just the occasional rustle of leaves. Still, that feeling, the gnawing sensation of being watched, clung to me, even as the fire burned down to embers outside. The next morning, I pushed my nerves aside and geared up again. Today was the day I was going to push deeper into the trail. I was determined to find something, anything that could give my channel the edge I was looking for. I packed my camera, drone, and enough supplies to last until nightfall. As I set off, something felt different. The forest had taken on an oppressive quality. The air was heavier, the light dimmer. The trail seemed to have changed too. The trees were growing closer together, the undergrowth thicker. Landmarks I thought I'd passed before were suddenly missing, or maybe I'd misremembered them. Either way, I felt more disoriented than I'd like to admit. but I pressed on. Several hours into the hike, my camera started malfunctioning. The battery, fully charged that morning, drained rapidly. The drone refused to take off. When I checked the footage I'd shot, static filled the screen, blurring everything. My frustration grew, but I wasn't about to quit. Not yet. That's when I saw it again. Ahead on the trail, the figure. It stood between two trees, far enough away that I couldn't make out any details, but close enough to feel its presence. Tall, impossibly tall, and still. My breath hitched as I fumbled for the camera, but by the time I raised it, the figure had vanished again. I stood frozen for a moment, my pulse racing. What the hell was that? I wasn't imagining things. There had been someone or something out there, but there was no sign of anyone now. No footprints, no rustling leaves, just silence. I should have turned back then. I should have packed up and left. But something deeper than curiosity kept me going. It was pride, maybe ego, the need to prove to myself that I wasn't just a YouTuber chasing shadows. I was a professional. I knew these woods. I pressed on, my mind racing with thoughts of how this footage, real or not, could be my breakthrough. I could see the thumbnails, the titles, the cursed collector trail, captured on film. It would go viral, guaranteed. But as the hours dragged on, the trail seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. I wasn't sure how far I'd gone anymore. The sun, which should have been high in the sky, seemed to hang low, casting long shadows earlier than it should have. And then I heard the whispers. At first they were faint, barely audible over the crunch of my boots on the dirt, but the deeper I went, the clearer they became. Voices, indistinct, like a conversation just out of earshot. I stopped, straining to listen. My heart thudded in my chest. Ryan. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but hearing my name sent a cold shiver down my spine. I spun around, scanning the forest, but there was no one. Just trees. And then there it was again, the figure, closer this time. It stood in the shadows, tall and unmoving, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I took a step back, my breath quickening. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. Ryan. The voice was clearer now, coming from the figure. My legs felt heavy, frozen in place as I stared, unable to look away. It didn't move, didn't approach. It just stood there, watching. I fumbled for my camera, hands shaking, but when I hit record, the screen flickered and went black. The battery was dead again. My phone too, completely drained, though it had been fully charged that morning. Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted down the trail, my feet pounding the dirt. But no matter how far I ran, the forest seemed to stretch on forever. The landscape twisted around me, trails splitting off in directions I hadn't seen before, paths looping back on themselves. I was trapped. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a tree, my head spinning. The whispers hadn't stopped. They circled around me now, growing louder, more insistent. Come deeper. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear that clouded my mind. I wasn't going to let this happen. I'd survived worse. I just needed to think, to get my bearings. But then I saw it. My camp. The RV. I stumbled forward, relief flooding through me as I reached the clearing. But something was wrong. The RV looked different. Older, like it had been sitting there for years, weathered and decaying. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. I had only been gone a day, 2 at most. But the way the RV sagged, its windows cracked, and the rust that ate away at the metal, it felt like I'd been gone for much longer. Ryan. The voice was right behind me. I turned, and there it was, the collector. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its shadow stretching toward me, its eyes glowing brighter now, like embers in the dark. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Ryan, come with me. The collector's voice was a low whisper, soft and inviting, pulling at me, urging me to follow. It took a step forward, and I could feel its presence, heavy and cold, as though the very air around me had thickened. No. I choked out, my voice barely audible. The collector's eyes burned into me, its shadow growing longer, reaching out. I stumbled backward, finally breaking free of the paralysis that gripped me. Without thinking, I turned and ran. My legs burned as I sprinted into the trees, away from the RV, away from the trail. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees twisting and shifting as I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. The whispers followed me, echoing in my ears, growing louder and louder until they became a roar. But I kept running, pushing through the exhaustion, the fear, the disorientation. I didn't stop until the first light of dawn broke through the trees, and when I finally did, I realized I had made it out. The forest was still behind me, the whispers gone, the collector nowhere in sight. I was alive, but I didn't feel relief. Only emptiness. I left the Sawtooth National Forest that day, my RV abandoned where it had been claimed by the forest. I never posted the footage. There was nothing to show anyway, just static, shadows and whispers. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the collector calling my name, waiting. I should have known better than to trust an unmarked road. After years of travel writing, you'd think I'd have a sharper instinct for bad decisions, but there I was, driving deeper into Fort Pinchot National Forest, chasing a forgotten trail that was supposed to lead me to a ghost town no one could find anymore, vanished off the map. The ranger at the visitor center had said, with a grin, "People go looking for it and never see it again. It's like the road just swallows you up." He laughed, but I could see the glint in his eye. He loved spinning those kinds of tales for tourists. But I wasn't a tourist. I was a writer. Damn it. I had an assignment to finish, and there was no room for ghost stories. I followed the narrow, crumbling logging road as it wound deeper into the trees. My RV rattled along, tires crunching over fallen branches and loose gravel. The road narrowed, barely wide enough for my rig, but I kept going. I'd done my research, and this was the right way, even if the forest seemed determined to reclaim the path. It had been a long day, and I was eager to set up camp and relax before exploring the area the next morning. The further I went, the thicker the trees grew, their branches knitting together overhead, blotting out the late afternoon sun. My GPS had long since lost signal, but I didn't need it. I was prepared. I had maps. I was confident I didn't get lost easily. But as I rounded the last bend in the road, something changed. The sky had been clear earlier, but a dense fog was rolling in now, thick and fast. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road, which had been clear just moments ago, seemed to dissolve into a gray blur. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. Just up ahead, a small clearing appeared through the mist. It wasn't much, but it was enough room for me to park the RV. I didn't have many other options. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The fog clung to everything, making the air feel damp and cold. It shouldn't have been this cold, not in early fall. The chill crept into my bones, but I pushed it aside and started setting up camp. Something about the silence gnawed at me, though. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness in that damned fog. I finished my setup quickly, and then retreated to the warmth of the RV. I wasn't nervous, but the quiet was getting under my skin. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into the driver's seat, and pulled out my maps. I spread them across the dash, looking for my next move. The ghost town was supposed to be less than a mile away, hidden deep in the woods, down a trail that was barely marked. Tomorrow, I'd hike to it, get my pictures, take some notes, and be done with it. Easy. But something was off. The road I'd driven on wasn't showing up on the map anymore. I traced the route with my finger, confused. The road was here. I'd just come down it, but now on the map it wasn't anywhere to be found. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield at the fog-shrouded forest. The ranger's words echoed in my mind. Vanished off the map. I laughed softly to myself. It was a joke. A tall tale to scare off amateur hikers. Nothing more. Still, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I felt it again, that unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, curling around the RV like tendrils. I looked back toward the road I'd driven in on, but it wasn't there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stepped forward, peering into the mist. No road, just an unbroken line of trees. My stomach tightened. I walked a few more steps, hoping the road would reappear, but it didn't. The forest was dense, the trees close together. There was no sign of the path I had taken just hours earlier. It was as if it had been swallowed whole. I jogged back to the RV, heart racing now. I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to where the road should have been, sweeping the beam through the fog, but all I could see were trees, tall, dark, and oppressive. My breath fogged the air in front of me as I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The road couldn't just vanish. I hadn't gotten lost. I couldn't have. But when I turned back toward the RV, I felt it, that creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight around, heart pounding, and for a split second I thought I saw movement in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the trees. "Hello?" My voice cracked. I regretted speaking as soon as the word left my mouth. The fog swallowed my voice, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing. I backed toward the RV, my nerves on edge, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to let a little fog and a missing road freak me out, but something felt wrong. The rational part of my brain was trying to make sense of it. Fog could play tricks on your eyes, and maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. That was all. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I spent the next hour pacing the length of the RV, checking and rechecking my maps, trying to retrace my route in my head. Nothing made sense. The road had been there. I hadn't imagined it. By nightfall, the fog had thickened to the point where I couldn't see more than a few feet outside. The temperature had dropped even more, and I cranked up the RV's heater, wrapping myself in blankets. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, soft thuds like footsteps outside and whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. It had to be the fog, I told myself. It was distorting sound, making me paranoid. But when I woke in the middle of the night, there were voices. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear them, faint, murmuring voices coming from outside. I crawled to the front of the RV, heart hammering, and peered through the windshield. The figures were back. This time, there were more of them. Shadows in the fog, standing still, watching. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. I scrambled to turn on the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power. The RV was silent, cold, and dark. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, but the beam barely cut through the fog. I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but my heart was racing, my mind spiraling into panic. The road was gone, the figures were back, and now I was trapped here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and burst out of the RV. The cold hit me like a slab. I marched toward where the road had been, determined to find it, but the forest had shifted. The trees were closer now, the fog denser. I walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape stayed the same. It was as if I was walking in circles. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back at the RV. I could hear the voices again, closer now. They echoed through the fog, indistinct and ghostly. My flashlight flickered, and the shadows appeared again, closer this time, standing just beyond the beam of light. I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. The figures were out there, circling me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadows loomed outside, never coming closer, but never leaving. Morning came, though I could barely tell. The fog hadn't lifted, and the road was still gone. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I turned the RV around, driving slowly back the way I had come. If the road was there, I couldn't see it. All I could do was follow the same path I'd taken before, hoping it would lead me out, but it didn't. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, a straight line through the fog, leading nowhere. And as I drove, I realized with sinking dread that I was still trapped. The road hadn't taken me anywhere. I was driving in circles, and the figures were still there, watching, waiting. They had me now. The vanishing road wasn't just a story, it was real, and I wasn't getting out. When you spend enough time alone, the silence becomes something else. It's no longer a backdrop, but a living, breathing thing that creeps in around the edges of your thoughts. I thought I liked the silence. That's why I had been living on the road for months, with no one but myself and my RV for company. But this trip to Ocala National Forest was supposed to be different. I needed to reset, to get my head straight. I guess that's what they all say before they lose it. The first day was easy enough. I set up camp on the edge of the forest, not far from one of the swamps that ran through Ocala. I had picked this spot on purpose, far enough from the touristy campgrounds, but close enough to the water to take some good photos. Photography had become my new hobby, something to fill the long stretches of time, something to keep my mind off Rachel. The forest was thick with towering pines and oaks, their branches twisting and closing in overhead. The light filtered through the leaves in a way that made the air seem heavy, almost suffocating, but it was peaceful, or at least I told myself it was. I parked the RV near a clearing, right where the swamp met the woods. The ground was firm enough, and I didn't think much of the water nearby. I had no reason to worry, not yet. By the time I finished setting up, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows that stretched across the clearing. The air was unnervingly still, like the whole forest was holding its breath. But I didn't mind. Solitude was the whole point. I sat outside for a while, watching the last of the light fade before retreating inside the RV. The hum of the small generator I had hooked up was the only sound breaking the silence. Everything seemed fine. Everything was fine, until the light started flickering. It was subtle at first, just a dimming of the overhead lights. I figured the wiring was faulty, nothing I couldn't fix. I'm a mechanic by trade, after all. I ignored it, settling in with a book, trying to lose myself in the words. But then the flickering got worse. The lights flashed on and off in rapid succession. The shadows in the RV danced wildly before everything went dark. I sighed, more frustrated than anything, and grabbed my flashlight. After a few minutes of fumbling with the wires, I got the power back on. The light stabilized, but there was something else. A soft buzzing noise, faint, just at the edge of hearing, like a distant hum. It might have been the swamp, maybe bugs, or just the generator straining, but it set me on edge. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, the unease I'd felt the night before was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. The sunlight was warm, and the swamp shimmered in the early light. I grabbed my camera and set out for a walk, looking for something worth capturing. Ocala was known for its beauty, the kind of untouched wilderness that's hard to find these days. But the deeper I walked into the woods, the more I realized something was off. It started small, little things I could have easily ignored. My compass acting up, the needle spinning lazily before settling in the wrong direction. The buzzing sound from the night before returned, louder now, seeming to come from all around me. I chalked it up to the swamp mosquitoes, maybe, or some malfunction with the generator still ringing in my ears. But when I came back to camp, I noticed the first real sign that something wasn't right. My gear, things I'd left on the picnic table outside, was scattered across the ground, not in a way that suggested wind either. The table had been cleared. My flashlight, the lantern, the tools I'd left out, all of them were scattered in a perfect line toward the swamp. I stopped, staring at the items. Someone had been here, or something. I'm not easily spooked, but my gut told me to get back inside, lock the doors. That night, I sat in the RV, every light on, clutching a lantern just in case the power flickered again. I told myself it was fine, probably some animal. Bears get curious, right? But when the tapping started, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was soft at first, just a light tapping on the window, like something brushing against it. I glanced over but didn't see anything. I convinced myself it was the wind, the branches moving in the breeze. But then the tapping came again, and again. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door, stepping out into the cold night air. The swamp smelled foul, like rot and decay, and the buzzing sound was back, louder than ever. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the clearing, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Large, human-like prints, leading right up to the window of my RV. The mud was fresh, still wet from the swamp, and the prints were clear. But there were no other signs of anyone around, no trails leading away, just those prints stopping right at the window. Then, nothing. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to believe it was someone playing a prank, some camper messing with me, but I hadn't seen another soul since I got here. No cars at the trailhead, no signs of other campers nearby. I hurried back inside, locking the door, but I knew it wouldn't help. The feeling in my gut told me I was being watched. By the third day, I wanted out. I'd seen enough. But when I tried to start the RV, nothing happened. The engine clicked but wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, but the RV refused to start. Panic settled in. My phone had no signal this deep in the forest, and the nearest ranger station was miles away. The buzzing sound was louder now, constant, like a low hum in the back of my skull. I packed a bag and decided to hike out. Staying another night was out of the question. The trail was familiar enough, but something was different. The air was thick, stifling, and the swamp seemed to have crept closer. I hadn't noticed it before, but the water was rising, soaking the ground around my campsite. The once dry trail was now a muddy mess, slowing me down as I tried to navigate through the trees. And then I saw them. At first, they were just shadows moving between the trees, barely visible in the corner of my eye. I stopped, trying to focus, but every time I turned to look, they were gone. My heart raced. I pushed forward faster now, but the shadows followed me. They stayed just out of sight, flickering in and out of existence like ghosts. By the time I reached the halfway point, the whispers started. It wasn't loud, just a faint, distant murmur, but it was unmistakable. Voices speaking in a language I didn't understand, too quiet to make out the words. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing, just the trees, the swamp, and those damn shadows. The trail blurred before my eyes, and I stumbled, my head swimming. I couldn't think straight. The buzzing, the whispers, it was too much. I needed to get out of here, but no matter which way I turned, the trail led me back to the swamp. It was like the forest was folding in on itself, trapping me in a maze of water and trees. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, and then I saw them. Standing at the edge of the swamp, barely visible in the twilight, were the figures. They were tall, too tall to be human, with elongated limbs and dark faces. They didn't move. They just stood there watching me, their forms flickering in and out of the shadows, like something half-formed, not fully real. I backed away, my heart pounding, but they didn't follow. They didn't need to. The buzzing sound grew louder, the whispers more insistent. I turned and ran, not caring where the trail led. I just needed to get away. When I finally collapsed back at the RV, drenched in sweat and mud, the sun was already setting. The swamp had crept even closer, the water now lapping at the edges of the clearing. I locked myself inside, every light on, but it didn't matter. I could still hear them. The whispers, the tapping, the buzzing. It all grew louder, closing in on me from every side. I knew what was out there. I'd seen it, and it was only a matter of time before it got in. I sat there in the dark, clutching the flashlight, waiting for the moment when the door would creak open, waiting for the shadows to finally step into the light. I don't know how long I sat there, hours, days. The buzzing is in my head now, a constant hum I can't escape. The figures are closer. I can see them outside, just beyond the trees. Their eyes are glowing in the darkness. They're waiting for me, and I'm not sure how much longer I can resist. My name is George Vincent, and back in 2016, I decided to take my RV out to a quiet spot near the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. My wife was usually my camping partner, but she caught a bad flu, so I went solo. I figured I could manage a few nights alone, read a few books, and fish. My idea of the perfect downtime was no phone service, no one around, and a lake where the fish didn't mind biting. I parked the RV in a secluded spot right near a lake, and after a few hours of quiet, I felt my shoulders drop. The only sounds were the soft rush of the wind in the pines and the occasional splash in the water. I set up a few fishing lines on the edge of the lake and grabbed a beer from the cooler, sinking into my camping chair as the evening settled in. On the first night, I thought I heard something outside the RV around midnight, just a few crunches on the gravel like someone was walking. I figured it was an animal, a deer maybe, though I still got up and looked outside, finding nothing, just shadows and the silent forest. I brushed it off. This wasn't my first solo camping trip, and I was used to hearing noises now and then. The second night, though, I heard it again. This time, the crunching was slower, deliberate, not the kind of sound an animal makes. I was lying in bed, trying to read by flashlight, but the noise made me put down the book. I listened for a few moments, then quietly got up and peered out the small RV window. Standing near the edge of the clearing was a tall man. He was in his 50s, I'd guess, with gray hair and clothes that looked too clean for camping. He stood completely still, his face tilted up as if he was sniffing the air. It wasn't exactly the type of scene I expected to see on a solo camping trip, and my first thought was that he was probably a ranger. I decided to step out and ask if he needed help. As I opened the door, he turned slowly toward me, and I noticed his lips twitching into what could have been a smile, or maybe a snarl. I felt my stomach tighten, but I ignored it. "Hey there," I called. "Can I help you with something?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me with that fixed, unnerving look, his lips parting a little like he was tasting the air. There was something off about him, but I tried to keep things normal. You camping out here too?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was scratchy like he hadn't used it in a long time. "Got lost," he muttered, his words almost a whisper. "Been out here, looking for a place to stay." I tried to keep my tone casual. "Well, there's a town about 20 miles south. I could show you the way in the morning." His eyes shifted, and for a moment I thought he'd agree. But then he looked down at my fishing gear lying on the ground by the water. "I haven't had fish in a long time," he said, his voice barely audible. It was then that I noticed his hands. They were covered in what looked like dried blood. My heart started to race, but I forced myself to stay calm. I have some food in the RV," I said, inching back toward the door. "You're welcome to some if you're hungry." He took a step forward, still smiling that strange half-snarl of his. "I don't eat canned food," he said, as if that settled things. I nodded slowly, my hand reaching for the door handle. "All right then. Well, I'd best get some sleep." Before I could turn around, he took another step toward me, closer now, and his voice dropped to a raspy whisper. "What are you doing out here alone, friend?" There was something chilling in the way he said friend, as if it meant the opposite. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. "Just camping. I like the quiet." He tilted his head, examining me with a strange intensity. "You're lying." My pulse hammered in my chest, but I forced a casual smile. "No, I'm just a regular guy out for some peace and quiet." His eyes narrowed, and he took another slow step forward. I knew that I needed to get back inside, lock the door, and maybe even drive off if he kept pressing closer. "All right," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "You take care now." I turned, and that's when I heard him sprint forward. Instinct kicked in, and I threw myself into the RV, slamming the door just in time to hear his fists pounding against it. The door shook, the thin walls rattling as his voice grew louder, angry. "Let me in, friend," he screamed, his voice twisted with rage. "You think you're safe in there?" I scrambled back, locking myself in the small bathroom, listening as he tried the handle, then started circling the RV, tapping on each window, trying each latch. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath, hoping he'd get bored or think better of it. But he didn't. For hours, he lingered outside, muttering to himself, his voice carrying words I couldn't quite make out. Occasionally, he'd laugh, a low, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. When I finally dared to peek out through a crack in the bathroom door, I saw his face inches from the window, his eyes scanning the inside of the RV as if he were hunting something, or someone. Eventually, he moved back, retreating into the forest as the first light of dawn broke over the trees. I waited a full hour, my heart still hammering, before I worked up the nerve to unlock the door and step outside. I thought he was gone. But as I moved to collect my fishing gear, I found a makeshift camp hidden in the trees nearby, littered with rotting food, empty cans, and something else. Bones. Small bones. Some picked clean, others still covered in dried blood. When I looked closer, I saw something scrawled on a piece of bark near the edge of his camp. The words were carved in deep, jagged letters, "One more to go." That was when I knew he hadn't just been lost. He'd been hunting. And that night, I'd been the one he'd chosen. I stumbled back from the trees, my eyes darting around the quiet, misty forest. Every crackle of a branch sounded too loud, too close. I grabbed my fishing rod, not even caring about the tackle box I'd left on the shore. I just needed to get out. I sprinted back to the RV, threw myself inside, and started the engine. The tires kicked up gravel as I tore out of the clearing. I could barely keep my hands steady on the wheel, gripping it so hard my knuckles went white. The forest blurred past me as I drove, trying to leave every trace of him behind. I didn't slow down until I hit the main road. It was only then that I let myself breathe, glancing over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't somehow trailing me. When I finally pulled into the nearest town, I parked outside a diner, its lights casting a soft glow in the early morning. I didn't care about looking disheveled or that I was the only customer there before dawn. I just wanted to be around people. The waitress took one look at me and brought over a cup of coffee without even asking. "Rough night?" she asked, eyeing the scrapes on my arms from where I'd bolted through the trees. I nodded, trying to steady myself enough to take a sip. "You could say that," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me a moment, then leaned in, speaking quietly. "You're not the first. There have been stories of strange folks around those woods, folks who don't belong, who are hunting something." I felt the chill as her words echoed what I'd seen. "What do you mean? Hunting?" I asked, needing to hear someone else say it out loud. She lowered her voice even more. "People go missing now and then." Then, as I left the diner, I saw it. A small, crumpled piece of bark wedged into my windshield wiper. Jagged letters carved into it. "I know where you are." I left that town and never looked back. I wasn't sure why I'd come back. Maybe it was the need for closure, a way to put everything behind me. It had been over a year since my wife Sarah passed away, and ever since I'd been drifting through life, avoiding people and dodging their well-meaning questions. When I was a park ranger, the forest had always been my sanctuary, and I thought maybe, just maybe, a trip back to the Cherokee National Forest would help clear my head. But as I parked my RV in a secluded spot deep in the forest, far away from the designated campsites, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was a mistake. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the trees, and I watched the colors fade into darkness as I set up camp. The last time I'd been here was with Sarah, years ago, when life still made sense. Now it was just me, alone with my thoughts. I wanted the isolation. I needed the silence, or at least that's what I told myself. I sat by the fire, the crackle of the flames the only sound in the stillness of the forest. The night pressed in around me, thick and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I stared into the fire, my mind drifting back to Sarah. I could almost hear her laugh, see her smile through the flickering flames. That's why I was here, to say goodbye, to finally let her go. I thought this place, our place, would help me find some peace. I was wrong. It started with a phone call. I'd turned my phone off the moment I arrived, didn't want any distractions, didn't need anyone bothering me. But as I sat there, staring into the flames, I heard it. The familiar sound of my phone ringing. I frowned, confused. I hadn't turned it back on. Slowly, I stood up and walked over to where I'd left it on the small table inside the RV. The screen was glowing, showing an unknown number. How was that possible? I had no signal out here, not this far from the nearest cell tower. Curiosity got the better of me. I answered the call. "Hello?" My voice was rougher than I expected, a little shaky at first. There was nothing but static, a low hum that buzzed in my ear. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable. "Dan." I froze. My blood turned to ice. It was Sarah's voice. "Dan, it's me." My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing to find some logical explanation. It had to be a prank, some sick joke. But the voice, it was hers. The way she said my name, that soft, familiar tone. "Sarah," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. The static surged louder now, drowning out the voice. I called out again, but the line went dead. I stood there in the RV, staring at the phone in my hand, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. What the hell just happened? I checked the call log. Nothing. No record of the call. It was like it had never happened. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind. Grief does strange things to people. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I just wanted to hear her voice again so badly that my mind had created it. But as I sat back down by the fire, the unease gnawed at me. Something felt wrong. The night wore on, and the fire died down to embers. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. The quiet felt oppressive now, too heavy. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to forget the sound of her voice. Then the phone rang again. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my ears. The screen glowed in the dark, the same unknown number flashing across it. I hesitated this time, but eventually answered Dan. The voice was clearer now, more distinct. It was Sarah, no doubt about it. "Come to me." The line crackled, and for a moment I swore I heard something else. A faint knocking sound, like someone tapping on the walls of the RV. I jumped out of bed and hurried to the window, peering out into the darkness. There was nothing, just the dense forest, silent and still. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to calm myself down. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think rationally. There was no way Sarah could be calling me. She was gone. I knew that. I'd buried her. But the voice, it was so real. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the RV had me on edge. By morning, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. The next day, I tried to distract myself. I hiked some familiar trails, took in the beauty of the forest, and reminded myself why I loved this place. But the feeling of unease never left me. It lingered like a shadow, always just out of sight. That evening, as I sat by the fire again, my phone rang. I stared at it, dread pooling in my stomach. The same unknown number, the same impossible call. I let it ring, watching the screen until it finally stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking maybe it was over. But then the RV shook. It was subtle at first, just a faint tremor, like something had bumped into it. I stood up, glancing around the campsite. No wind, no animals, nothing that could have caused it. Then I heard the knocking again. Soft, deliberate, like someone tapping on the side of the RV. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, shining the beam into the trees. The light cut through the darkness, but there was no one there. Just the empty forest, silent as ever. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. It had to be an animal, a deer maybe. But as I turned back to the RV, I saw it. A figure, just at the edge of the trees. It was too far to make out clearly, but it looked like a person. My heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, squinting into the darkness. The figure stepped back, disappearing into the trees. I ran after it, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. "Wait!" But when I reached the spot where the figure had been, there was nothing. No tracks. No signs that anyone had been there at all. Just me and the towering trees, their branches twisting overhead like skeletal hands. I turned back, my head spinning. This couldn't be real. It had to be the grief, the isolation messing with me. Maybe I'd finally lost it. As I walked back to the RV, my phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it, but I couldn't stop myself. I picked it up, my hand trembling. "Dan, I'm here. Come to me." The voice was so clear now, so real. It sounded like Sarah was right there with me, just out of reach. "I miss you," she whispered. "Come find me." My chest tightened. Tears stung my eyes. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she was still out there, waiting for me. But I knew it wasn't her. It couldn't be. I slammed the phone down and ran into the RV, locking the door behind me. The knocking started again. Louder this time, more insistent. Something wanted me to open that door. Something wanted me to follow. I sat there in the darkness, listening to the knocks, the whispers, my heart racing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The following day, I packed up camp. Whatever was out there, I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I needed to leave now. But the forest had other plans. As I drove through the winding forest roads trying to make my way back to the main road, I realized something terrifying. I was lost. No matter which turn I took, I ended up back in the same place, the same trees, the same path. The forest was keeping me here. My phone rang again. I ignored it, but the knock came back, echoing through the RV louder and louder until I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed on the brakes, jumping out of the RV, screaming into the trees. "Leave me alone!" The forest answered with silence, and then the whispers returned. Sarah's voice rising on the wind, calling to me, luring me deeper into the trees. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed the only thing I had left, my lighter. I built a fire bigger than any I'd made before, the flames roaring into the sky. The knocks stopped, the whispers faded. The forest was quiet again. But I knew, deep down, it wasn't over. I eventually found my way out, back to civilization, but I left the RV behind. I couldn't bring myself to take it with me. I knew what was waiting in those woods. I never went back to the Cherokee National Forest, and every night, when the phone rings, I don't answer, because I know it's not her. I should have known better than to trust an unmarked road. After years of travel writing, you'd think I'd have a sharper instinct for bad decisions, but there I was, driving deeper into Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, chasing a forgotten trail that was supposed to lead me to a ghost town no one could find anymore, vanished off the map. The ranger at the visitor center had said with a grin, People go looking for it and never see it again. It's like the road just swallows you up." He laughed, but I could see the glint in his eye. He loved spinning those kinds of tales for tourists. But I wasn't a tourist. I was a writer. Damn it. I had an assignment to finish, and there was no room for ghost stories. I followed the narrow, crumbling logging road as it wound deeper into the trees. My RV rattled along, tires crunching over fallen branches and loose gravel. The road narrowed, barely wide enough for my rig, but I kept going. I'd done my research, and this was the right way, even if the forest seemed determined to reclaim the path. It had been a long day, and I was eager to set up camp and relax before exploring the area the next morning. The further I went, the thicker the trees grew, their branches knitting together overhead, blotting out the late afternoon sun. My GPS had long since lost signal, but I didn't need it. I was prepared. I had maps. I was confident I didn't get lost easily. But as I rounded the last bend in the road, something changed. The sky had been clear earlier, but a dense fog was rolling in now, thick and fast. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road, which had been clear just moments ago, seemed to dissolve into a gray blur. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. Just up ahead, a small clearing appeared through the mist. It wasn't much, but it was enough room for me to park the RV. I didn't have many other options. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The fog clung to everything, making the air feel damp and cold. It shouldn't have been this cold. Not in early fall. The chill crept into my bones, but I pushed it aside and started setting up camp. Something about the silence gnawed at me, though. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness in that damned fog. I finished my setup quickly, then retreated to the warmth of the RV. I wasn't nervous, but the quiet was getting under my skin. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into the driver's seat, and pulled out my maps. I spread them across the dash, looking for my next move. The ghost town was supposed to be less than a mile away, hidden deep in the woods, down a trail that was barely marked. Tomorrow, I'd hike to it, get my pictures, take some notes, and be done with it. Easy. But something was off. The road I'd driven on wasn't showing up on the map anymore. I traced the route with my finger, confused. The road was here. I'd just come down it, but now on the map, it wasn't anywhere to be found. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield at the fog-shrouded forest. The ranger's words echoed in my mind, vanished off the map. I laughed softly to myself. It was a joke, a tall tale to scare off amateur hikers. Nothing more. Still, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I felt it again, that unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, curling around the RV like tendrils. I looked back toward the road I'd driven in on, but it wasn't there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stepped forward, peering into the mist. No road, just an unbroken line of trees. My stomach tightened. I walked a few more steps, hoping the road would reappear, but it didn't. The forest was dense, the trees close together. There was no sign of the path I had taken just hours earlier. It was as if it had been swallowed whole. I jogged back to the RV, heart racing now. I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to where the road should have been, sweeping the beam through the fog. But all I could see were trees, tall, dark, and oppressive. My breath fogged the air in front of me as I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The road couldn't just vanish. I hadn't gotten lost. I couldn't have. But when I turned back toward the RV, I felt it, that creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight around, heart pounding, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the trees. "Hello?" My voice cracked. I regretted speaking as soon as the word left my mouth. The fog swallowed my voice, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing. I backed toward the RV, my nerves on edge, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to let a little fog and a missing road freak me out, but something felt wrong. The rational part of my brain was trying to make sense of it. Fog could play tricks on your eyes, and maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. That was all. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I spent the next hour pacing the length of the RV, checking and rechecking my maps, trying to retrace my route in my head. Nothing made sense. The road had been there. I hadn't imagined it. By nightfall, the fog had thickened to the point where I couldn't see more than a few feet outside. The temperature had dropped even more, and I cranked up the RV's heater, wrapping myself in blankets. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, soft thuds like footsteps outside and whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. It had to be the fog, I told myself. It was distorting sound, making me paranoid. But when I woke in the middle of the night, there were voices. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear them, faint, murmuring voices coming from outside. I crawled to the front of the RV, heart hammering, and peered through the windshield. The figures were back. This time, there were more of them. Shadows in the fog, standing still, watching. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. I scrambled to turn on the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power. The RV was silent, cold, and dark. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, but the beam barely cut through the fog. I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but my heart was racing, my mind spiraling into panic. The road was gone, the figures were back, and now I was trapped here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and burst out of the RV. The cold hit me like a slab. I marched toward where the road had been, determined to find it, but the forest had shifted. The trees were closer now, the fog denser. I walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape stayed the same. It was as if I was walking in circles. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back at the RV. I could hear the voices again, closer now. They echoed through the fog, indistinct and ghostly. My flashlight flickered, and the shadows appeared again, closer this time, standing just beyond the beam of light. I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. The figures were out there, circling me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadows loomed outside, never coming closer but never leaving. Morning came, though I could barely tell. The fog hadn't lifted and the road was still gone. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I turned the RV around, driving slowly back the way I had come. If the road was there, I couldn't see it. All I could do was follow the same path I'd taken before, hoping it would lead me out. But it didn't. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, a straight line through the fog, leading nowhere. And as I drove, I realized with sinking dread that I was still trapped. The road hadn't taken me anywhere. I was driving in circles, and the figures were still there, watching, waiting. They had me now. The vanishing road wasn't just a story. It was real, and I wasn't getting out. My name is Tobias Grayson. In the summer of 2018, I decided to leave behind the chaos of city life for a week of solitude at Glacier National Park in Montana. I thought a little peace might do me good, trading honking horns for the whispers of the forest. I arrived on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, the towering mountains looming above like ancient sentinels, their snow-capped peaks glinting in the sunlight. The air was clean, sharp, and cool, and a clear stream sparkled nearby. The spot I chose to park my RV could have been ripped straight from a postcard. Perfectly picturesque, almost too perfect. A few hundred yards away, another RV was parked. A middle-aged couple stood outside, waving. They seemed friendly, so I waved back. Part of me was relieved. Maybe I wouldn't be completely alone out here. The first day passed pleasantly enough. I hiked a nearby trail, breathing in the crisp scent of pine. A deer grazed in a meadow, lifting its head to regard me with indifference before returning to its meal. I thought about taking a picture, but something about the moment felt too delicate, too fleeting to interrupt. Back at the campsite, I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to start a campfire. Eventually, I managed to coax a small flame to life. Feeling victorious, I cooked up some canned beans, gourmet wilderness cuisine. As dusk fell, the couple, Linda and Mark, invited me to join them for a drink. Their fire crackled warmly, and we shared stories while passing a bottle of whiskey. Mark's joke about a bear walking into a bar was terrible, but we laughed anyway. Whether from the alcohol or the easy camaraderie, I couldn't tell. Around 10 p.m., I thanked them and headed back to my RV. The night was stunning. Stars spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds, their brilliance unspoiled by city lights. I fell asleep feeling at peace, a rare sensation in my life. That peace didn't last. A rustling outside woke me in the dead of night. I told myself it was just an animal, a deer, maybe, but something about the sound made my skin prickle. It was too deliberate, too close. The next morning, I decided to check on Linda and Mark. I walked over to their campsite expecting the smell of coffee and the sight of them enjoying the morning sun. Instead, I found their RV door wide open. "Linda? Mark?" I called. No response. The RV's interior was a mess. Chairs were overturned, belongings scattered. The air was heavy, suffocating, as if the space itself recoiled from what had happened inside. My stomach turned. I stumbled out, heart hammering, and began searching the area. About 50 yards into the woods, I saw it. A smear of red on a tree trunk. Blood. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I followed the trail. The smears led me deeper into the forest, to a small clearing where I found Mark, or what was left of him. His body lay twisted, battered, and broken, deep gashes carving grotesque patterns across his torso. His face wasn't a face anymore. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. This was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, not a nightmare come to life. I thought of Linda. If she was alive, I had to find her. The forest closed in around me, every shadow a threat. Then I heard it. A faint, muffled cry. It was coming from up ahead. Creeping closer, I reached another clearing and froze. Linda was tied to a tree, gagged and thrashing in desperation. Standing over her was a man. He was tall and wiry, his clothes filthy and torn. His hair hung in matted clumps, and in his hand, he clutched a hunting knife. I had no weapon, no plan. My hands trembled as I grabbed a fallen branch, my only option. "Hey!" I shouted, charging into the clearing. The man turned, his eyes wild and hollow like something not entirely human. I swung the branch with everything I had, hitting his arm and making him drop the knife. "Run!" I yelled to Linda, fumbling with the ropes binding her. The man recovered fast, lunging at me and tackling me to the ground. His hands wrapped around my throat, squeezing the life out of me. Desperate, I clawed at his face, my thumb jamming into his eye. He howled, letting go. Linda freed herself and grabbed the knife. She tossed it to me just as the man lunged again. This time I was ready. I sidestepped and slashed at him, the blade slicing across his arm. Blood sprayed, but he barely flinched. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered. "Get help!" I yelled at Linda. She hesitated, but then bolted into the forest. The man grinned. "Just you and me now." We circled each other. My hands shook, but I gripped the knife tighter. He lunged, and we fell to the ground, wrestling for control. His hands found my throat again, squeezing harder. My vision blurred, black spots dancing before my eyes. My fingers brushed against a rock. With all my strength, I brought it down on his head. Once. Twice. He grunted and rolled off me, clutching his skull. I didn't wait. I ran. Branches tore at my skin, but I didn't stop until I saw it. The ranger station. Linda was pounding on the door, screaming for help. A park ranger stepped out, his hand already on his gun. "There's a man. He killed someone," Linda cried. Before she could finish, the man stumbled from the woods, his eyes gleaming with fury. "Stop," the ranger commanded. The man didn't. The first shot hit the ground, a warning. The second hit his leg, and the third, his chest. He fell, finally still. The ranger approached cautiously, gun trained on the body. "Daniel Harper," he muttered. "Used to be a guide, snapped after his family died. He's been out here ever since." By the time the authorities arrived, it felt like years had passed. Mark's body was recovered. Statements were taken. As I packed up my RV, Linda turned to me. "Thank you," she said softly. I forced a smile. "Next time I'm camping somewhere with Wi-Fi." She laughed, but her eyes were haunted. So were mine. Driving away, I glanced at the mountains in my rearview mirror. They stood as silent witnesses to what had happened, their beauty now forever tainted. In 2019, I, Nolan Harper, left the monotonous grind of my desk job for an adventure in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. After years of screens and fluorescent lights, I craved the unfiltered serenity of nature. My RV was stocked with everything I thought I'd need: hiking boots, a fishing rod I barely knew how to use, and enough canned beans to outlast a disaster. It was early September, and the mountain air was crisp as I wound my way through towering pines, their shadows creeping over the road like fingers. By late afternoon, I found a picturesque campsite near Lake Serenity. The lake mirrored snow-capped peaks, the kind of scene that belonged on postcards. A few RVs were parked nearby, their owners keeping their distance, which suited me fine. One man, rugged and in his late 50s, waved from the lake where he fished. I waved back before turning my focus to setting up camp. Before dinner, I decided on a short hike. The trail was well trodden and bordered by ancient trees. About a mile in, I came across an old, weather-beaten cabin, its roof sagging and windows boarded up. The air around it felt heavy, oppressive even, but curiosity urged me to take a look. The door creaked open, releasing a plume of dust. Inside, a table covered in carvings caught my eye. Hearts, initials, and other marks left by visitors over the years. Then I saw it, carved fresh and deliberate. Beware the Watcher. The words sent a chill through me. The cabin seemed to grow darker, the walls pressing in. I left in a hurry, my footsteps crunching loud in the stillness. The feeling of being watched prickled at the back of my neck, though every glance over my shoulder revealed only empty woods. By the time I returned to my RV, the unease lingered like a shadow. That evening, as I overcooked pasta on my portable stove, the man from the lake approached. He introduced himself as Frank Bennett, and we exchanged pleasantries. Frank had a rugged charm, but something in his demeanor shifted when I mentioned the cabin. His smile tightened. "Best to steer clear of places like that," he said, his voice low. "You never know what you'll find." His words hung in the air long after he returned to his RV. The forest came alive as the night deepened. Crickets chirped and leaves rustled in the breeze, lulling me into a restless sleep. At some point past midnight, a sound yanked me awake, a faint scratching against the side of the RV. I froze, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, like nails dragging across metal. My heart pounded. Grabbing a flashlight, I hesitated before opening the door. The beam cut into the darkness, revealing nothing. The scratching stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, just as I began to relax, a loud thud echoed from the roof. My breath hitched as I scrambled to grab a hiking pole for defense. "Frank, if this is your idea of a joke, it's not funny," I called into the night. No response. A shadow darted between the trees, too fast to make out. My blood ran cold. The forest that had seemed so inviting now felt like a trap. I retreated to the RV, locking every door and window, and sat gripping the steering wheel, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Dawn brought a fragile sense of relief, but that shattered when I saw the scratches along the side of my RV, long, jagged marks gouged into the metal. Footprints, barefoot and disturbingly large, led from the RV into the woods. Frank's RV was gone without a trace. At the nearest ranger station, I reported everything. The noises, the vandalism, the footprints, and Frank Bennett. The ranger's expression darkened when I mentioned his name. "There's no one by that name registered here," she said, "but we've had reports over the years of a man up there causing trouble. Locals call him the Ranger, knows the terrain, wears old ranger gear, but we haven't had an unaccounted ranger in decades." I left feeling no safer. As I packed up my camp, every rustle of leaves felt like a warning. Then behind me, "Leaving so soon?" I spun to see Frank standing a few yards away, his hands in his pockets, his smile thin and unnatural. "Where did you go this morning?" I demanded. "Your RV was gone." "Had errands," he replied smoothly. "Everything all right?" "No," I snapped. "Someone trashed my RV last night. The rangers think there's a lunatic out here." Frank's expression darkened. "Lunatic, huh?" He took a step closer. "You know, Nolan, these woods have a way of sorting out who belongs and who doesn't." His words sent a spike of fear through me. Then I noticed it. Dried blood on his boots. "What's on your boots?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Breakfast," he said, his smile widening. "I'm a messy eater." Panic surged as he lunged, tackling me to the ground. His grip was iron, his eyes wild. "You should have stayed away from that cabin," he hissed. I fought back, managing to knee him in the stomach and break free. Scrambling to the RV, I barely locked the door before he began pounding on it, the glass splintering under his fists. With trembling hands, I started the engine and floored it, the RV careening down the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, Frank stood in the road, watching as I disappeared into the distance. At a gas station miles away, I spotted a missing persons poster on the bulletin board. The face was unmistakable, Frank Bennett. The date, 2010. Later, I learned Frank had been a ranger whose daughter vanished in those woods years ago. Her disappearance broke him, turning him into a twisted guardian of the forest, The scratches on my RV and the footprints were only part of his warning. The remains of hikers were found near Lake Serenity weeks later, along with a ranger's badge engraved with his name. Authorities believe he perished in the wilderness, but no body was ever recovered. I haven't returned to the mountains since. Some trails are better left untraveled, especially those watched by eyes that never sleep. My name is Landon Mercer, and in 2018, I made the regrettable decision to take my RV into the Adirondack Mountains for what I thought would be a refreshing escape. I've always liked to think of myself as an outdoorsy guy, though, truth be told, I prefer my s'mores microwaved and my coffee brewed by machines. But the idea of disconnecting from the city's chaos appealed to me. Plus, I was tired of my friends mocking me, saying the closest I'd ever get to nature was my computer wallpaper. It was time to prove them wrong. I packed the RV with essentials: canned food, books I'd been putting off, and enough mosquito repellent to drench an army. The drive was peaceful, with towering peaks piercing a canopy of clouds. I found a pristine spot by a crystal-clear lake, the kind of place that looks like a dream on a postcard. Landon Mercer, conqueror of the wild, I thought smugly as I set up camp. That night, as I settled into the RV, a strange rustling from the woods pulled me from my book. "Probably just a raccoon," I muttered, though the sound was heavier than what I'd expect from a scavenging critter. Still, I brushed it off and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I found my campsite torn apart. Trash was strewn everywhere, my snack wrappers shredded. It looked like a bear had wandered through. Great, I sighed, cleaning up the mess. Determined not to let it ruin my trip, I set out on a trail I'd read about. The sun-dappled forest seemed serene, almost enchanting. Halfway through, I came across a man. He looked like he'd been lost in the wild for months. Tangled hair, clothes stained with grime, and a piercing gaze that felt too focused. "Morning," I greeted, offering a polite nod. He stared at me, silent, and walked past without a word. As I continued, an unease began to creep in. The forest no longer felt inviting. Twigs snapped behind me, and the wind whispered through the trees, too much like voices. I spun around several times, certain I was being followed, but I saw nothing. "Relax, Landon," I told myself, laughing nervously. Back at the RV, I tried to shake the feeling. Night came quickly, bringing a storm with it. Rain hammered down as thunder rattled the windows. Just as I started to drift off, there it was again, the sound of footsteps outside. Deliberate, heavy. My stomach tightened. Grabbing a flashlight, I flung the door open and shone the beam into the rain-soaked darkness. "Hello? Anyone out there?" I called. No response. The light caught something, though. Footprints in the mud leading into the woods. Human. Uneasy, I locked the door and climbed into bed, clutching the tire iron I kept for emergencies. A deafening thud jolted me awake sometime after midnight. It sounded like something, or someone, had slammed into the RV. Heart pounding, I crept to the door and threw it open, tire iron in hand. At the edge of the woods, barely visible in the drizzle, stood the man I'd seen earlier. His tattered clothes clung to him, and his head tilted unnaturally as he stared at me. In his hand, a serrated hunting knife gleamed under the moonlight. "Can I help you?" I called, my voice cracking. He didn't respond. Instead, his lips curled into a grin so grotesque it made my blood run cold. He moved then, faster than I thought possible, lunging toward me. I swung the tire iron, but he ducked, the knife grazing the air between us. I stumbled back into the RV, slamming the door and locking it as the knife blade punctured through the thin metal inches from my face. The engine roared to life, and I slammed on the gas. Mud sprayed as the tires fought for traction, but the RV finally lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the road, the rain streaking his knife as he watched me vanish into the night. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station. The clerk, a woman with glasses perched on her nose, looked up in alarm as I burst inside. "Call the police," I gasped. "There's a man, he attacked me." Her face darkened. "You're lucky you got away," she murmured. "What do you mean?" I asked, breathless. "There've been incidents, hikers disappearing, campsites wrecked. The police say it's wildlife, but folks around here know better." The police arrived soon after. They took my report seriously and promised to investigate. The next morning, they called me back. "We found your campsite," the officer said, "but no sign of the man. What we did find," he hesitated. "There was a shallow grave nearby, multiple victims. We believe you may have encountered the killer. A cold dread settled over me. In the following weeks, local news outlets dubbed him the Atarac Killer. Police eventually uncovered an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. Inside were journals filled with ramblings about purification and decay, signed by a man named Victor Holloway. A survivalist gone mad, he'd vanished into the wilderness years ago and was now preying on anyone who ventured too close. They never caught him. As for me, I sold the RV and haven't gone camping since. My friends laugh when I tell them I'm more of an indoorsy guy now, but they don't know the truth. They don't see him in my nightmares. The grin, the knife, the cold, unblinking eyes. My name is Elliot Turner. In 2017, after years of crunching numbers as an accountant, I decided I needed a break from the monotony of spreadsheets and cubicles. A week of solitude in the desolate expanse of Big Bend National Park in Texas sounded like the perfect antidote to my routine-driven life. Morning coffee at 7 a.m. sharp, lunch at noon, bed by 10 p.m. My existence had been little more than a series of checkboxes. But lately, the boxes felt empty, meaningless. So I packed up my RV with supplies and hit the road, eager for a change of scenery and perhaps a story to tell that didn't involve tax codes. The drive was long but liberating. Miles of barren road stretched endlessly before me, the kind of emptiness that made you question your own place in the world. I amused myself with bad puns to stave off the eerie silence. Why did the accountant go to the desert? To count sand instead of money. I chuckled nervously as though the joke might hold off the creeping sense of unease I couldn't quite place. By the time I reached Big Bend, the sun was sinking behind jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of blood and fire. The rugged landscape glowed ominously as shadows lengthened, and the desert came alive in its own quiet, mysterious way. I found a secluded spot near the Rio Grande, set up camp, and prepared a modest dinner of canned beans and hot dogs. The stars emerged in full splendor, undiluted by city lights. I reclined in a lawn chair, sipping a beer, marveling at the stark beauty and silence that wrapped around me like a shroud. For the first time in years, I felt small. The next morning, I decided to explore a hiking trail I'd read about. The guidebook called it moderate, which suited me just fine. I was no mountaineer. I packed water, snacks, and a map and set off. The trail wound through narrow canyons, the rocky walls pressing close like silent sentinels. Desert flora clung to the arid ground, defiant and strange. It was breathtaking, in a way that made your chest tighten with awe and fear. Around midday, I stopped in a shady alcove to eat. The quiet pressed in, no birdsong, no scurrying lizards, only the low whistle of the wind through the canyon. It was an oppressive silence, the kind that makes you acutely aware of how alone you are. I shrugged it off and pressed on. That's when I found the truck. It sat at an odd angle off a faint dirt path that veered from the main trail, rusted and abandoned. Dust coated the windows, obscuring whatever lay inside. Its license plate was from out of state, and it looked like it hadn't moved in years. As I approached, a sickly metallic stench filled the air, making my stomach churn. Something inside me screamed to turn back, but curiosity tightened its grip. I peered closer, but couldn't see much through the grime. The stench grew stronger. I backed away, my pulse quickening. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching the brittle ground behind me. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. When I turned, there was nothing, only the empty path stretching behind me. "Get a grip, Elliot," I muttered, trying to steady my breathing, but I didn't linger. Back at the RV, the unease lingered, a dull ache in my gut. I tried to distract myself with a campfire, roasting marshmallows and watching the flames lick the night sky. But the shadows beyond the firelight seemed to shift and writhe like something just out of sight. Around 9 p.m., as I was preparing to turn in, I heard it again, a sharp crack like a twig snapping underfoot. I froze, marshmallow stick in hand. "Hello?" I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. No reply, just the wind. Or was it? The hairs on my neck prickled. I grabbed a flashlight and swept it across the desert. Nothing. Still, I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed nervously at myself, jumping at shadows like a child. Then came the first thud. A dull, heavy sound against the side of the RV. My blood turned to ice. I whispered to myself, "It's an animal, just an animal." But the second thud was harder, deliberate, shaking the entire vehicle. I scrambled for my phone. No signal. Panic clawed at my throat. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a cast iron skillet, and crept toward the driver's seat, my fingers fumbling for the keys. The window beside me shattered with a deafening crash. Glass sprayed across my face, and a hand, rough and scarred, latched onto my arm, pulling me with inhuman strength. I swung the skillet blindly, desperation giving my strike weight. It connected with a sickening crunch, and the hand released me. I didn't wait to see what or who it was. I turned the key, slammed the RV into gear, and floored it. The engine roared as the RV careened down the narrow dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I thought I saw a shadow stagger into the darkness, but I didn't stop to be sure. Eventually, I reached a ranger station, my nerves frayed and my hands shaking. I babbled incoherently about the attack, and the rangers immediately radioed for backup. As they listened, their faces grew grim. "You're lucky to be alive," one of them said quietly. Hours later, they brought a man to the station in handcuffs. His face was bruised, his eyes cold and void of humanity. My blood ran colder when I saw the emblem on his tattered jacket. It matched the one on the rusted truck. "That's him," I whispered. The search of his belongings revealed duct tape, knives, and photographs of campers, some of the faces hauntingly familiar. The man, Leonard Graves, was a wanted killer, linked to multiple disappearances across the country. When dawn broke, I sat outside the ranger station, a bitter cup of coffee in hand, staring blankly at the dented skillet they'd returned to me. The desert seemed less menacing in the daylight, but the memories of that night clung to me like smoke. I cut my trip short, the allure of adventure now replaced by a desperate need to feel safe. Even now, back in my apartment, that skillet hangs on my kitchen wall, a grim reminder that some stories are better left untold. My name is Caleb Hartman. In 2015, I decided to take my RV to the remote Alani National Forest in Pennsylvania. As a software developer glued to screens day and night, I craved a break. Just me, the trees, and the solitude of the wild. The forest had always seemed like a sanctuary, a place to breathe deeply and feel alive. That illusion shattered in ways I still can't fully comprehend. I found a secluded spot by a small, serene lake. The tall pines stretched toward the heavens, their shadows dappling the water's surface. It was beautiful, tranquil, almost sacred. After setting up camp, I unfolded my chair, cracked open a beer, and watched the sun melt into the treetops. As darkness crept in, I lit a fire, its flames painting the trees with flickering light. The warmth, the crackling logs, and the scent of burning wood soothed me. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. Then the voice shattered it all. "Nice night for a fire." I froze. A man stood at the edge of my campsite, just outside the firelight. He was tall, gaunt, with tangled hair and a beard that hung like moss from his face. His clothes were filthy and torn, and in his hand he held a battered, rusted toolbox. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, flashing a grin that was more a baring of teeth than a smile. I forced a weak laugh, heart hammering in my chest. No worries, just wasn't expecting company out here." "Name's Earl," he said, extending a hand smudged with grime. "Caleb," I replied, hesitating before shaking it. His grip was cold and firm, the kind that lingered too long. "You out here all by your lonesome?" His tone was casual, but his eyes were anything but. They were sharp, probing, and far too interested. "Just getting some fresh air," I said, trying to sound relaxed. "Needed a break from the city." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on me with unnerving intensity. "Mind if I join you for a bit?" "Actually, I was just about to turn in," I said, forcing a polite smile. He shrugged. "Another time, then." With that, he turned and disappeared into the woods, humming a strange off-key tune. I sat frozen, staring into the fire. Something about him felt wrong. The way he'd appeared so silently, his questions, his grin. The wilderness no longer felt serene. It felt oppressive, like it was pressing in on me. I doused the fire, locked myself in the RV, and tried to sleep, but every rustle outside made my skin crawl. Around midnight, I heard footsteps circling the RV. Slow, deliberate. My breath hitched as I strained to listen. Then silence. Just the forest, I told myself. Just an animal. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. The next morning, the sunlight erased some of the terror from the night. Determined to shake off my unease, I decided to hike a trail circling the lake. The air was crisp, the forest alive with bird song. but every now and then I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. About an hour in, I stumbled upon an old cabin, its roof sagging and walls covered in moss. The door hung open, creaking slightly in the breeze. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The stench hit me first. Rot, decay, something foul and festering. The interior was a chaotic mess of broken furniture and scattered debris. As I turned to leave, something on the wall stopped me. Photographs. Dozens of them. Faded, pinned haphazardly to the wood. My breath caught. They were of people. Campers, hikers, families, taken without their knowledge. Some smiled, unaware. Others stared blankly as if they'd been caught off guard. Then I saw it. A photo of me, sitting by my campfire, from last night. A chill raced down my spine. I backed out of the cabin, nearly tripping over the threshold, and broke into a run. My only thought was to get back to the RV and get the hell out of there. But the forest seemed different, darker, unfamiliar. When I reached a fork in the trail that I didn't remember passing, panic began to creep in. My phone had no signal, of course. I pushed forward, eventually stumbling into a clearing. In the center was a large wooden cage, crudely built. Inside were backpacks, clothing, even children's toys. My stomach churned. Looking for something? I spun around. Earl stood at the edge of the clearing, his grin even wider now. "What is this?" I demanded, though my voice trembled. "Souvenirs," he said, casually stepping closer. "Memories of folks who've passed through." I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. "I think I'll be leaving now." "I'm afraid I can't let you do that." Then he lunged. From here, the chase is relentless, the tension building as Earl tracks Caleb through the forest, culminating in the fiery showdown at the lookout tower. Every moment is laced with dread. Earl's calm, taunting presence, Caleb's frantic flight, and the oppressive, suffocating isolation of the woods. The story ends as Caleb escapes by the slimmest margin, Earl consumed by the fire, but not without leaving scars on Caleb's psyche that he'll carry forever. My name is Felix Dempsey, and back in 2018, I sought out solitude in the remote stretches of the Gila National Forest in New Mexico. After quitting my job as a software engineer, a life spent staring more at code than at daylight, I figured the wilderness might be just what I needed to reset. I wasn't exactly an outdoorsman. The closest I'd come to wildlife was a raccoon that had once ransacked my trash cans back home. But armed with a GPS, a stack of canned beans, and an overinflated sense of confidence, I set off into the wild. The Gila was known for its rugged beauty, and I was eager to experience it firsthand, even if roughing it, for me, meant satellite TV and a propane stove. The first few days were uneventful. I hiked a few trails, took photos that couldn't possibly capture the grandeur of the landscape, and even managed to start a campfire without singing my eyebrows. A personal achievement. But one evening, as I was attempting to cook dinner, burning hot dogs over the fire, a truck rumbled past my campsite. It was an old, beat-up pickup, rumbling by with an unsettling sense of purpose. It was strange, given how isolated the spot was. The driver didn't wave, and I couldn't make out his face. I shrugged it off, assuming he was just another camper or a local. The next morning, I decided to explore a creek I had marked on my map. I packed a small backpack with essentials, water, snacks, and a book, and set off. The trail was narrow but well-worn, winding through towering pines and junipers, with birds chirping overhead. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely relaxed. About an hour into the hike, something caught my eye. A rusted metal sign partially hidden by shrubs. It read, "Private property. No trespassing." That was odd. According to my map, this was supposed to be public land. But curiosity got the best of me. Against my better judgment, I pressed on. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in on me. The air grew thick, heavy with an unnatural silence. I told myself it was just the quiet of the wilderness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then I spotted it. Nailed to a tree, a row of animal skulls. Deer, maybe elk. Their bleached white faces stared out at me, arranged in a macabre pattern. A chill crawled down my spine. Okay, time to turn around, I muttered, trying to ease my growing anxiety. Note to self, don't mess with the local decorating styles. I retraced my steps, but after only 10 minutes, the trail began to look unfamiliar. The trees seemed denser, the underbrush more tangled. I pulled out my GPS, but the screen was blank. Dead batteries. Fantastic. My phone had no signal, of course. Then I heard it. The faint crunching of leaves behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Probably just a squirrel or some other critter. I pressed on, my heart rate quickening. Lost in the woods. Classic Felix, I muttered, trying to make light of the situation. But then, closer this time, a twig snapping. My stomach flipped. I stopped in my tracks. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I kept moving, picking up the pace, trying to navigate my way back to camp. After what felt like an eternity, I broke through the trees into a small clearing. Relief washed over me, but that relief evaporated as my eyes fell on the clearing's centerpiece. A shack. The cabin was crude, constructed from mismatched planks and corrugated metal. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney pipe, and tools, animal hides, and other debris were scattered around. Whoever lived here hadn't been expecting company, and I had no intention of being an uninvited guest. But just as I turned to leave, a voice called out, "Looking for something?" I froze. Emerging from behind the cabin was a man, tall, wiry, his face weathered, as if it had been etched by decades of sun and wind. He wore a stained flannel shirt and casually held a hunting rifle at his side. "Sorry," I stammered. "I think I'm lost, just trying to get back to my campsite." He eyed me, his gaze unblinking, cold. "Not many folks come this way," he said, his voice gravely. "Yeah, well, first time out here," I replied, forcing a smile. "Beautiful place you've got." He didn't respond, just stared at me, his eyes narrowing with something unsettling. "Could you point me back toward the main trail?" I asked. He gestured vaguely with his rifle. "Trail's that way." "Thanks," I said, taking a step back, trying to retreat. But before I could turn away, he spoke again. "Hold on a minute." My pulse spiked. "You in a hurry?" His voice was a low drawl, oozing with something sinister. "Well, I should get going before it gets dark," I said, my stomach twisting. He smiled, revealing yellowed teeth that looked like they'd never met a toothbrush. Plenty of daylight left. I glanced at the sky, noting the sun beginning its descent. "Better safe than sorry," I said, trying to force a casual tone. He chuckled, a hollow, unsettling sound. "City boy like you shouldn't be out here alone." "I guess you're right," I said, taking a step back. "I'll just be on my way." As I turned, his voice cut through the air like a knife. "I insist you stay a while." My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't have time to react before he raised the rifle, leveling it at me. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, my voice shaky. "Trouble?" he echoed, his grin widening, his eyes glittering. "Ain't no trouble at all." Before I could move, he closed the distance between us. He had a look in his eyes, a wild, unhinged glint that made my blood run cold. "I've got some questions for you," he said, the words more of an order than a request. I weighed my options. Running was out. He had a gun. Talking might buy me time. "Okay," I said, swallowing hard. "What do you want to know?" He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Why are you trespassing on my land?" "I didn't mean to," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I must have missed the signs." He grinned, dark amusement in his eyes. "Oh, you saw the signs. Folks always see the signs." "I swear I just got turned around," I said, my voice cracking slightly. He scratched his chin with the barrel of the rifle. "City folks think they can just wander anywhere." I took a small step sideways, eyeing a rusty shovel leaning against a tree. The idea came quickly, dangerously. It was a bad idea, but maybe my only chance. "You're right," I said, trying to sound casual. "I should have been more careful." He nodded, slowly. "Reckon you should have. That's a fine cabin you've got," I said, trying to distract him. "Did you build it yourself?" He glanced back at the shack. "Built it with my own 2 hands." "Impressive," I said, inching closer to the shovel. "Must have taken a lot of work." "Hard work never scared me," he said, his eyes narrowing. I was almost within reach of the shovel. "Wish I had those skills," I said, keeping the conversation going. "I'm all thumbs when it comes to that stuff." "Bet you are," he said, his lips curling into a sneer. Suddenly I lunged, grabbing the shovel and swinging it toward his rifle. The metal clanged against the barrel, knocking it aside as a shot rang out, the sound echoing through the forest. The man stumbled back, momentarily surprised, but he wasn't deterred. I didn't wait for a second chance. I bolted into the trees, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Get back here," he yelled behind me. Branches whipped against my face as I ran, the ground uneven beneath my feet. Another gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering a tree trunk to my left. Not how I planned to spend my vacation, I thought, gasping for air. Ahead, I spotted a rocky incline leading down to a creek. Without hesitation, I scrambled down the slope, nearly losing my footing. Reaching the water, I splashed through it, hoping it would mask my trail. Up ahead, I saw an overhang in the hillside, an old cave. I ducked inside, pressing my back to the cold stone, my breath ragged. For what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I listened to the forest's eerie silence. Then I heard footsteps. He was above me. "Can't hide forever," he called. My chest tightened as I held my breath, every muscle tensed. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps faded. I slowly crept out of the cave and made my way back, praying I hadn't been spotted. At the crest of a small ridge, relief washed over me. Through the trees, I saw the faint outline of my RV. Summoning every last bit of energy, I sprinted toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached it, I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling. I managed to wrench the door open and quickly locked it behind me. Inside, I grabbed my phone. Still no signal. With a desperate murmur, I whispered a prayer as I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life just as a shadowy figure stepped from the trees. He raised the rifle and fired, the bullet shattering my side mirror. "Time to go," I muttered under my breath, slamming my foot down on the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward, tires spinning wildly in the dirt as I sped down the uneven trail. The vehicle rattled with every jolt. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the path, growing smaller and smaller as I pulled away. After what felt like an eternity, I finally hit the main road. My phone beeped with a signal. I pulled over and dialed 911, my hands still shaking as I spoke. I was attacked in the Gila National Forest. A man shot at me. "He's dangerous." The operator assured me that help was on the way. I drove to the nearest ranger station, where law enforcement took my statement and organized a search. A few days later, I received a call from the sheriff's office. They'd found evidence near the cabin, grave sites containing human remains. The man had been identified as Harold Hank Mercer, a fugitive wanted across several states for multiple murders. He'd been living off the grid, evading capture for years. They thanked me for reporting him, saying my encounter might bring closure to the families of those he'd killed. As for me, I traded the RV for a plane ticket to anywhere with lots of people and no chance of crossing paths with deranged hermits. My name is Maxwell Ridley. Back in 2017, I decided to escape the creeping chaos of my life as a freelance graphic designer. The constant screen glare had begun to blur the lines between day and night, drowning my thoughts in a haze of pixels. So I did what seemed like the obvious solution. I took my RV to the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, hoping that a week of fresh air and seclusion would clear my head. I wasn't much of an outdoorsman, but the idea of waking up to nothing but trees and sky seemed like the reset I desperately needed. I packed the RV with the essentials: canned food, bottled water, and an old guitar I hadn't played since college. The drive was uneventful until I hit a dirt road that appeared far less traveled. My GPS signal fizzled out, but I didn't mind. Disconnecting was the whole point, right? After what felt like hours, I found a secluded clearing by a lake so still it looked like a sheet of glass. Perfect. I set up camp and took a moment to appreciate the silence. That's when he appeared. A man, tall and lean, his face weathered by years of sun, stepped from the tree line. He wore a faded flannel and carried a fishing rod, his eyes narrowing as he approached. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," he said, his voice rough, like gravel being scraped against stone. "Just looking for some peace and quiet," I replied, trying to keep it light. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that lingered just a bit too long. "Be careful around here, the terrain can be unforgiving," I chuckled nervously. "Thanks for the tip, I'll keep an eye out." He scrutinized me for a long moment and then, without another word, vanished back into the woods. I shrugged it off. People in remote places could be quirky, right? That evening, I built a campfire, strummed a few chords on my guitar, and lost myself in the breathtaking night sky. The stars were unlike anything I'd seen, crisp, bright, overwhelming. The serenity was almost intoxicating. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, I decided it was time to turn in. As I locked up the RV, I heard a rustling noise behind me. Probably just a raccoon, I thought. but the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. It was a fleeting thought, though. I didn't give it much attention. The next morning, I ventured into the woods to gather firewood. About half a mile from my camp, I stumbled across a small cabin, abandoned. The windows were boarded up and the door sagged from one hinge like it was about to fall off at any moment. My curiosity won. I pushed the door open and a musty stench hit me immediately, mixed with something sharper, metallic. I stepped inside. The place was bare, just a table, a chair, and a fireplace. But on the table, there was a hunting knife stained with what looked like dried blood. My heart skipped. Then I noticed something worse. Drag marks on the floor, leading to a trapdoor. Every horror movie I'd ever watched screamed at me to turn around, but the strange pull of curiosity dragged me deeper. I lifted the trapdoor and shone my phone's flashlight into the darkness below. A set of wooden stairs descended into the abyss. Against every instinct, I descended. The basement was freezing, the air thick with rot. The walls were lined with old newspaper clippings and photographs. Missing persons, dozens of them. I scanned the faces and something in my gut twisted. Then I saw it. His face. The old man from the clearing, but younger, much younger. A sudden thud from upstairs froze me. Footsteps. They were coming closer. My breath hitched. I turned off the flashlight, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, moving toward the trapdoor. I needed to escape. I felt my way along the cold stone walls until I found a small window, half covered in dirt. I scrambled through, tearing my jacket, scraping my arms. Outside, the forest stretched out before me, branches whipping my face as I ran, panic surging through me. When I finally reached my RV, my heart sank. The tires had been slashed, the windows shattered, my supplies were scattered, and the gas tank was empty. Someone had made sure I couldn't leave. I heard the crunch of leaves behind me. I spun around. The old man stood at the edge of the clearing, a rifle slung over his shoulder. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice cold as ice. "This is public land," I shouted, trying to steady my shaking voice. He smiled, the expression sickening. "Not anymore. You've seen too much." My mind raced. "Look, I just want to leave. I won't tell anyone. I swear." He shook his head slowly. "Afraid I can't let you do that." Without warning, he raised the rifle. The shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the metal frame of the RV. Adrenaline surged through me as I dove behind the vehicle, crawling beneath it, my heart pounding in my throat. There's nowhere to run," he called, his voice low and sure. I spotted a heavy wrench that had fallen from my toolbox. I grabbed it, my hand trembling, waiting. The moment his boots appeared beside the tire, I swung with all my might, the wrench connected with his ankle. He cried out, stumbling backward, the rifle slipping from his grip. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled out from under the RV, grabbing the gun. My hands were shaking as I aimed it at him. "Stay back!" I yelled, my voice hoarse. He laughed, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "You don't have it in you." He lunged. I pulled the trigger. The recoil knocked me off balance, but the bullet found its mark. He collapsed to the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I turned and ran, the rifle gripped tightly in my hands. My only hope was to find higher ground, somewhere my phone might catch a signal. Dusk fell and the forest became a maze of shadows. I stumbled upon a shallow grave. The earth was fresh. I leaned in, my stomach turning. A hand was visible, a silver ring on the index finger. Before I could react, I heard footsteps. I spun around. Another man. Younger, but with the same cold eyes as the old man. He held a machete, the blade stained dark red. "Family tradition," he said, nodding toward the grave. "You're not supposed to be here." I raised the rifle. "Back off." He tilted his head. "Bullets won't fix this." He charged. I fired. The gun clicked. Empty. I turned and ran. My legs burned with exhaustion, the uneven terrain threatening to send me face first into the dirt. The cliff's edge appeared before I even realized I was near it. I was trapped. His footsteps grew closer. In desperation, I threw the rifle at him. It caught him off guard. I lunged, tackling him to the ground. We grappled dangerously close to the edge. His machete slashed through the air, grazing my arm. The pain was blinding, but fear kept me fighting. I knocked the weapon from his hand, my strength born of sheer panic. With one last desperate shove, I sent him falling backward. His eyes widened as he plunged over the edge. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, blood soaking my sleeve. There was no time to rest. The old man was still out there. I stumbled through the forest, using the torn fabric of my shirt to bind my wound. Night had fully set in. The forest felt like it was closing in on me, the trees pressing in from all sides. Finally, I saw it, faint light through the trees. I made my way toward it, my legs barely holding me up. I stumbled into a ranger station, and the startled park ranger looked up from his desk. "Help me," I panted. His eyes widened as he saw the blood. "What happened?" "There's a family out there. Killers. They tried to." Before I could finish, pain erupted in my side. I looked down to see a tranquilizer dart embedded in my skin. My vision blurred. The ranger, his face eerily calm, stood over me. "Sorry about this," he said, his voice cold. The old man stepped out from a back room, his arm in a makeshift sling. "You shouldn't have ruined our operation," he said, his words slicing through my fading consciousness. I awoke in a dimly lit room, my hands bound. The walls were lined with jars, each containing what looked like organs. Panic surged. The door creaked open. The old man entered, followed by the ranger. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, voice hoarse. He pulled up a chair and sat down. "People come here to disappear. We just help them along." "You're insane," I spat, heart racing. The ranger stepped forward, syringe in hand. "This will make it easier," he said. I thrashed against my restraints. "Don't touch me!" A loud bang echoed outside, shouting. The old man and the ranger exchanged worried glances. "Stay here," the old man ordered. They both rushed out, voices muffled, commotion. I struggled against my restraints, my heart hammering in my chest. With a surge of desperation, I tipped the chair over, breaking it just enough to free one hand. I quickly untied myself and scanned the room for an escape. Behind a shelf, I found a vent. Prizing it open, I crawled through the narrow space, my battered body scraping against the cold metal. The vent led me outside, and I saw flashing red and blue lights in the distance. Police cars. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled toward them. An officer spotted me and hurried over. "Are you okay?" he asked. "There's a group. Killers. They're still out there," I stammered, my voice trembling. He escorted me to an ambulance where paramedics immediately started tending to my injuries. "You're lucky," the officer remarked as he helped me into the vehicle. "We got a tip about illegal activity in this area." "Who called?" I asked, still shaky. The officer shrugged. "Anonymous." As the ambulance doors shut, I caught a glimpse of the old man and the ranger being led away in handcuffs. Their faces were unreadable, stoic. Weeks later, I learned the truth. The area had been linked to dozens of missing persons. Frederick Hawthorne, the old man, and his son had been running a grotesque operation, luring in unsuspecting campers. The ranger was their nephew, keeping the crime within the family. The courts acted swiftly. They were all sentenced to life without parole. As for me, I traded the fresh mountain air for the noise of the city. My RV was gone, but it was nothing compared to the lives lost in those woods. I still work as a graphic designer, but now my portfolio includes a new series, Faces of the Lost, a tribute to those who weren't as lucky as I was. I've always been drawn to solitude in nature. There's something hauntingly cleansing about being miles away from civilization, surrounded only by towering trees and endless sky. The quiet, the emptiness, it settles something inside me, and for once I feel like I can breathe. That's why I bought the RV, a stubborn, ancient Class C motorhome I named the Beast, for its sheer size and relentless clamor on the road. I've made countless solo trips to national parks and forests, but one will haunt me forever. My last trip to Adara. Adara is vast, over 6 million acres of rugged mountains, dense forests, and untouched lakes in upstate New York. I planned for nothing more than 3 days and 2 nights in its wild embrace. No agenda, no distractions, just a break from the noise of life. I chose a remote site on the park's western edge, far from the beaten paths. It was late summer, the air warm but carrying a whisper of fall. The weather was perfect for a quiet retreat, or so I thought. I arrived in the late afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, ominous shadows across the trees. The campsite seemed idyllic, a secluded clearing by a small lake, bordered by towering pines. The air smelled of pine needles and fresh water. The only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional call of distant birds. It was perfect. The world, for a moment, felt like it had stopped spinning. I set up camp quickly, built the fire, made dinner, and as the sun disappeared behind the trees, I felt a rare peace settle over me. The first stars began to pierce the sky, their reflections dancing on the surface of the lake. Just me and the wilderness, I thought. Nothing else. But that was when I noticed something strange. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of light far across the lake near the edge of the trees. A firefly, perhaps, or a trick of the light. But then I saw it again, and again. A faint, glowing light hovering just above the treetops, pulsating like a heartbeat. My skin prickled. For a moment, a chill crawled up my spine, but I pushed the feeling down. The Adara were full of oddities, reflections, marsh gases, lightning bugs, but deep down, something didn't feel right. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing. After all, the woods were full of strange phenomena. I tried to settle into the night, but the flickering light lingered in my mind like a shadow. The next day, I spent most of the morning hiking, lost in the dense forest. The trees pressed in on me, suffocating in their wild, untamed beauty. I enjoyed the silence, the solitude, until I lost track of time. By the time I returned to camp, the sun was low, the world bathed in an eerie orange glow. And then I saw it again. But this time, it was closer, much closer. The light hovered just above the lake, glowing faintly in the fading light. It drifted along the shoreline as though it were following me. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. The light didn't scatter or disappear. It simply sat there, hanging in the air, silent, eerie, watching me. I shone the flashlight directly at it, but the beam passed right through as though the light didn't exist at all. Then, as if it had been waiting for me to notice, it vanished, just blinked out of existence. I stood frozen, scanning the trees and the still waters for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. No sound. No rustling. Just the cold night air pressing in around me like a suffocating blanket. I returned to the fire, my nerves rattled, but I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than a trick of the light. A reflection, perhaps. But I knew deep down that wasn't true. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, those faint, glowing orbs hovering just beyond the firelight, waiting. I woke up several times, straining to hear any sound outside, any sign of life, but all I heard was the wind whispering through the trees and the crackle of the fire slowly dying. By the third day, the unease had turned to dread. The forest, once inviting, now felt suffocating. The trees seemed to close in on me, watching, waiting. I tried to ignore the feeling, telling myself I was just tired, but by mid-afternoon I couldn't shake it. I had to leave. As I packed up my things, I heard it, a low hum, faint at first like a whisper through the trees, but it grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the air like the hum of electricity. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned toward the lake, and there they were, the lights. More of them now, hovering above the water, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. They moved in slow, deliberate patterns like they were searching for something, someone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. These weren't fireflies. These weren't reflections. They were something else, something ancient and unknowable. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. I turned and ran back to the RV, my heart in my throat. The hum outside grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the RV, rattling the windows. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, finally turning the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the RV into gear, tearing out of the campsite. I didn't look back. The hum continued to reverberate through the walls of the RV as I sped down the narrow road, my foot heavy on the gas. The trees whipped by in a blur, and my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What were those lights? What did they want? It wasn't until I reached the edge of the forest hours later that I finally allowed myself to breathe. The hum had stopped. The lights had not followed me. But I knew one thing for sure. They were still out there, waiting, watching. I've read about strange lights in the Adara before, other campers and hikers who've seen things they couldn't explain. They call them ghost lights or will-o'-the-wisps. No one knows for sure what they are. Some say they're spirits, others claim they're natural gases, but whatever they are, I know this much. They're real, and they're always watching. I haven't been back to Adara since. I never will. The Blue Mountains of New South Wales, Australia, are famous for their breathtaking beauty. Deep, shadowed gorges, mist-covered valleys, and towering eucalyptus forests that stretch endlessly across the horizon. It's a place where nature feels ancient, vast, and timeless. The air here is thick with secrets, the silence broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the whisper of wind through the trees. Yet, beneath this serene landscape, the Blue Mountains are steeped in dark legend. Whispers of spirits and creatures long forgotten, lingering in the cool mountain air waiting to be discovered. I had always dreamed of experiencing the vastness of the Blue Mountains for myself, so when my girlfriend Sam and our close friend James suggested a week-long camping trip, I couldn't say no. We were seasoned travelers, used to remote, wild places. The Blue Mountains, far from the hum of city life, seemed like the perfect escape, a place to disconnect, to breathe, to be alone with nature. The drive from Sydney took a few hours, and by the time we reached our campsite, the sun was already beginning its slow descent. We had chosen a spot deep within the national park, far from the well-worn tourist trails. The area was known for its dense forests and steep cliffs, the kind of place where few ventured, and we liked it that way. The isolation, the quiet, it didn't bother us. In fact, it was exactly what we were looking for. We set up camp at the edge of a small clearing, where the land fell away into the mist-laden valleys below. The eucalyptus trees surrounding us were towering and ancient, their leaves releasing a sweet, earthy scent that hung heavily in the air. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the landscape transformed. Shadowy gorges and distant ridgelines swallowed by thick, ghostly mist. The only sounds were the wind whispering through the trees and the occasional call of a bird, its voice fading into the eerie stillness of the evening. That first night, as we sat around the campfire, Sam began telling a story, one she had heard growing up, a legend from Aboriginal folklore. "You guys ever heard of the Yara Mai Ha Who?" she asked, her face illuminated by the firelight. James and I exchanged curious glances. "No," I said, poking at the fire with a stick. "Can't say I have." Sam leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The Yaramai Hahu is a creature that lives in the trees. It waits for travelers to stop and rest. It looks like a little red man, but it has these long, sucker-like fingers that it uses to drain people's blood. It doesn't kill them, though. It leaves them alive, just weak. Eventually, after enough draining, they turn into one of them." I let out a nervous laugh. "Great, just what we need. Another creepy story before bed." James grinned, clearly intrigued. "So it's like a vampire, but with sucker hands?" "Sort of," Sam said, her tone darkening. "It doesn't need fangs. It just grabs you while you sleep, drains your blood, then vanishes back into the trees." We laughed it off, passing around a bottle of whiskey and telling other ghost stories. But as the fire burned low and the night deepened, something about the forest began to feel different. The wind picked up, its whispering now audible through the branches, and the eucalyptus trees began to sway gently in the moonlight. The stars above were brilliant, but the valleys below had disappeared into an endless ocean of mist, obscuring everything beyond the clearing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Later, when we crawled into our tents, the fire reduced to a bed of glowing embers. The air turned colder, the wind picking up. It was enough to chill the bones, but not enough to drown out the sounds of the forest. I lay there listening to the distant calls of animals, the rustling of leaves, but exhaustion eventually overtook me and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke suddenly, the night still as death. For a moment, I wasn't sure what had roused me. The forest was silent, only the occasional creak of branches in the wind, the soft rustling of leaves. But then I heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible, something moving just outside my tent. I froze, straining my ears. Again, the faintest sound, footsteps almost, padding softly across the forest floor. I glanced at Sam. She was still asleep, her breath steady. Then I turned to James's tent, just a few feet away. His steady breathing was the only sound that broke the silence. But something was out there. I could feel it, crawling under my skin. My hand reached for the flashlight by my sleeping bag, my fingers trembling as I clicked it on. The beams sliced through the dark, illuminating the inside of the tent. I didn't dare unzip the door. Instead, I waited, my breath shallow, listening. Then came the rustling again, a low, almost imperceptible sound, like something brushing against the side of my tent. My heart hammered in my chest. I shone the flashlight toward the noise, but the light revealed only the thin fabric of the tent and the yawning darkness outside. "Sam," I whispered urgently, shaking her awake. She stirred, blinking, confused. "What is it?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. I could barely answer. The rustling had stopped, but the air inside the tent felt thick, heavy with tension. We waited, hearts racing, barely breathing, listening. Then from outside came a soft, wet slap, a sticky sound like something hitting the ground. My stomach churned. "What the hell was that?" I breathed, my voice tight. Sam's face had gone ashen. "It sounds like something's moving around." We stayed still, trapped in the silence, waiting for something, anything, to break it. The wind howled through the trees, but there was no more rustling, no more sounds. After what felt like an eternity, I finally mustered the courage to unzip the tent. Just a fraction, enough to peer outside. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing only trees and shadows, the mist swirling across the ground. There was nothing there, just the empty clearing, the sway of the trees, and the cold, endless night. We waited a little longer before deciding whatever it was had gone. Sam crawled back into her sleeping bag, but neither of us managed to sleep. I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling of the tent, my mind racing with thoughts of the Yara Maha Hu, its suckered fingers, its slow, inevitable drain. The next morning, we emerged from our tents, both of us shaken, though we didn't speak of it. The sun had risen, casting a warm, golden light over the mist-filled valley. James, of course, had slept soundly. He was already making coffee, blissfully unaware of the restless night we'd had. As I walked around the clearing, something caught my eye near the edge of the forest. Marks, strange circular indentations in the dirt, as if something had pressed itself into the ground. The shapes were too long, too narrow, almost like the imprint of a hand, but with a round, sucker-like center. I called Sam over. Her face turned white when she saw them. "What do you think?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Sam replied, her eyes locked on the strange marks. We didn't tell James. We didn't talk about the noises, the unease, or the strange feeling that something was following us. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but that lingering sense of being watched never left. On our last night, we packed up early, ready to leave before the sun rose. None of us spoke about it, but we all felt it. Something was wrong with the forest. Something was watching us from the shadows of the trees. As we drove away from the blue mountains, the mist rolling in once more, I glanced back at the forest, its dark silhouettes disappearing behind us. I wondered if the Yara Mai Hahu was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next group of travelers to stop to rest beneath its twisted trees. My grandfather always warned me about Blackwater Swamp. His stories were wild, filled with strange things lurking beneath the dark waters, creatures that hated being disturbed. As a child, I dismissed them as nothing more than the ramblings of an old man, the kind of ghost stories meant to scare kids around a campfire. But after what I experienced last summer, I wish I had listened. Blackwater isn't the kind of place you'll find on tourist maps. It sprawls across a forgotten corner of Louisiana, a labyrinth of cypress trees, tangled undergrowth, and stagnant water. On a good day, it's eerie, with fog drifting over the water at dawn and a constant hum of insects filling the air. But it's also breathtaking, wild, untouched, and remote, exactly the kind of place I love to explore. So when a long weekend opened up and I needed to escape the grind of city life, I packed up my RV and headed south toward Blackwater. It was late July and the air was thick with humidity, the kind that presses against you like a weight. I planned to camp by the water, fish, and maybe take my kayak out to explore deeper into the swamp. I had done it before, just never at Blackwater. I thought I knew what to expect, but I was wrong. Blackwater was different. From the moment I arrived, a strange sensation settled in the air, something oppressive, heavy. The trees loomed over me, their branches draped in long strands of Spanish moss, swaying gently in a faint breeze. The water was nearly black, a vast maze of narrow channels choked with reeds and lily pads. The whole swamp seemed to pulse with life, a symphony of frogs, insects, and the distant splashes of unseen creatures moving beneath the surface. I found a small clearing on dry land, a perfect spot to park the RV and set up camp. It was isolated, no other campers, no sign of civilization for miles, just me and the swamp. The first day passed without incident. I spent the afternoon fishing, catching a few bass, and watching the sun set behind the thick, dark trees. The orange glow over the still water should have been peaceful, but there was something unsettling about it, like the swamp was holding its breath. I brushed it off. Out here, alone in the wild, your mind plays tricks. That night, things took a darker turn. After dinner, I settled into the RV, lying in bed with the windows open to let in the cool night air. The sounds of the swamp were constant, frogs croaking, insects chirping, the occasional splash of fish jumping in the water. It was soothing. I was starting to drift off when, sometime around midnight, I woke suddenly. At first, everything seemed normal, the swamp still buzzing with life. But as I lay there, wide awake, I realized something was different. Beneath the usual sounds, there was another noise, a faint, distant humming, a low, rhythmic drone, almost like machinery coming from the water itself. I sat up, heart racing, straining to hear. The hum was subtle, barely audible, but it was there. There was nothing in the swamp that should make that kind of sound. No towns, no factories, just the swamp. My curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight, threw on my boots, and stepped outside. The night was thick with humidity, the mist clinging to the ground like a ghostly blanket. The hum was louder now, but still distant, coming from deep in the swamp. I scanned the water with my flashlight, cutting through the fog, but I saw nothing. Just the dark, still water and the twisted shapes of cypress trees. The sound tugged at me. Part of me wanted to turn back, but the other part, my explorer's instinct, compelled me to find its source. I grabbed my inflatable kayak, tied to the side of the RV, and pushed it into the water. The moment my foot touched the kayak, a cold chill crept over me, the air pressing down like a weight. But I shook it off and paddled into the swamp. The mist thickened as I moved deeper, the trees closing in on me. The water was unnaturally still, as if the swamp itself were holding its breath. Then I saw it. A soft, glowing orb hovering just above the water, barely visible through the mist, but unmistakable. It pulsed with an eerie light, casting an unnatural glow over the trees around it. I froze, heart pounding. It wasn't a flashlight. No one else was out here. It wasn't a firefly either. This light was too steady, too deliberate. It felt wrong. I wanted to turn back, but the hum was louder now, vibrating through the air, pulling me forward. Against my better judgment, I paddled closer, the light growing brighter as I neared. The mist swirled around me, thickening until I could barely see the trees. The air turned frigid, pressing down on me from all sides. Then, without warning, the light flickered out. The swamp fell into an unnatural silence. No frogs, no insects, no hum. Just the sound of my own breathing and the soft lapping of water against my kayak. My heart raced as I turned to paddle back to camp, but something made me stop. A shape rose slowly out of the water, just behind me. At first, I thought it was a tree stump or a piece of driftwood, but then it moved. Slowly, impossibly, it rose higher, its form dark and shrouded in mist. My blood ran cold as I watched, paralyzed by fear. It was taller than any man, its body dripping with black water. Its limbs were long and twisted like the branches of the cypress trees. I couldn't see its face if it even had one, but I could feel it, watching me. Then it spoke, not in words, but in that same deep, vibrating hum. It resonated through my chest, my bones, my very mind. The sound was overwhelming, filling me with a terror I had never known. It grew louder, more insistent, until I thought my head would explode from the pressure. I paddled blindly, my arms trembling, my vision blurring, desperate to escape. But the thing in the water followed, gliding through the swamp with unnatural speed, its form towering over me, just out of reach. I don't know how long I paddled, it felt like hours, maybe longer. But somehow, I made it back to camp. I crashed into the bank and stumbled out of the kayak, my legs weak, my lungs burning. The swamp was silent again, the mist thinning, the night returning to its normal rhythm of croaking frogs and chirping insects. But I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there, watching, waiting. I didn't bother packing up my camp. I jumped into the RV, slammed the engine into gear, and sped away. My heart was still pounding, and I didn't stop until I was miles from Blackwater. I never went back, and I never will. Some places, some things are better left undisturbed.